We all know that the Hajj is one of the most sacred journeys a Muslim can take. But have you ever wondered what it was truly like hundreds of years ago, in the 7th century, walking across endless deserts with camels, carrying your hopes and fears under a blazing sun? In today's video, we'll explore what life as a Muslim pilgrim back then would actually be like. So let's not waste any time and let's begin. Dawn spreads slowly across the desert, soft and muted, as though the sky is waking with the same careful breath as the people around you. The faintest gray light touches the edges of the camp, revealing silhouettes that were only shadows moments before. You feel the coolness of night slip away from your skin as the air warms, and with it comes the low murmur of voices, the creak of leather, and the soft hum of prayer weaving through the stillness. Camels rise one by one, their bodies lifting in long, deliberate motions, releasing deep groans that shake the sand beneath them. Their handlers move among them with calm efficiency, tightening straps, adjusting loads, murmuring to the animals as though speaking to old friends. The scent of dust, wool, and lingering smoke mingles with the morning breeze, creating a tapestry of smells that feels older than memory itself. You gather your few belongings, each item familiar by touch alone. A small sack, a bundle of cloth, the weight of a water skin pulling gently against your shoulder. Around you, pilgrims do the same. Some greet the new day with quiet smiles, others with solemn determination. Even the younger travelers seem subdued, aware that this is no ordinary journey. This is a step towards something greater, something sacred. As you join the caravan line, you find yourself beside people you've never met, but somehow already feel connected to. A merchant, adjusting the knot of his head covering, offers you a nod. A young student of scripture walks barefoot for the first hour, honoring a vow. An older woman leans on her carved staff, her face creased with effort and devotion in equal measure. Each person carries their own story, their own hopes, their own reason for answering the call to pilgrimage. The leader of the caravan raises his staff lightly, signaling the start. No speech, no announcement, just a gesture that ripples through the group until the entire line begins to move as one. Sand shifts beneath your feet, soft and cool at first, but warming with every step. The camels sway, their bells chiming softly, blending with the murmured recitations of travelers settling into the rhythm of walking. Your breath steadies. The sun edges higher. The camp behind you becomes smaller with each passing moment. Its fires extinguished, its voices fading into memory. Ahead, the world expands into wide stretches of pale gold, reddish hills in the distance, and a path worn smooth by countless feet long before your own. The desert feels endless and open, humbling in its vastness. Yet within that openness lies a strange comfort, a reminder that this road has been walked by others with the same intentions, the same fears, the same hopes. The horizon blurs slightly in the growing light, its heat already promising challenge, but also guiding you onward like an unspoken invitation. With the caravan finding its pace and the morning settling fully around you, the landscape begins to claim your attention. Every ripple in the sand, every shifting shadow, Every gust of warm wind hints at the journey still waiting ahead. And as the line of pilgrims stretches forward in a slow, steady march, your eyes lift naturally toward that long, unfolding road, wondering what the desert will ask of you next. The sun climbs with quiet certainty, warming the backs of the travelers as the caravan stretches farther into the open expanse. With the first miles behind you, the desert begins to reveal its character. Not hostile, but honest. Every rise and fall of the sand seems to whisper its own rhythm, inviting you to match your breath to the steady sway of the journey. The early heat gathers slowly, touching your face like a hesitant hand before it settles into something firmer. You feel it through the soles of your sandals when the ground shifts from cool, morning grains to warm, dry powder. Each step offers a subtle resistance, the sand giving way beneath you, requiring a patience that becomes almost meditative. You learn quickly to conserve your energy, to avoid lifting your feet too high, to let the sand guide rather than fight you. Around you, the caravan has fallen into a quiet, purposeful silence. Conversations are sparse in the morning hours, replaced by soft recitations, the rustle of robes, the occasional encouragement whispered to a camel, reluctant to move in a straight line. The beasts make their displeasure known with low grunts, but they settle once the rhythm of their gait takes over. Your water skin rests against your side, its familiar weight serving as a reminder to drink before you feel thirsty. The caravan leader had spoken earlier with a calm authority, explaining the unspoken rules of desert travel. Drink in small amounts, often. Walk at a pace that matches the slowest among you. Keep your eyes on the person ahead so the caravan remains unbroken. Wrap your scarf across your mouth when the wind rises. Never stray, even for curiosity. Out here, the desert rewards discipline and forgets those who wander. Midway through the morning, the first rest stop is chosen. A cluster of low stones arranged around a rare patch of firm ground. It's little more than a pause for shade and stretching, but the relief it offers feels generous. You lower yourself carefully, grateful for even a few minutes off your feet. A merchant beside you shakes his water skin, listening for the sound of water sloshing inside. He smiles when he hears it, one of the small comforts of this journey. An older woman adjusts the cloth around her shoulders to shield her from the growing heat. A young man with sunburned cheeks asks quietly if the next well is far. No one knows for certain, but the leader assures him it is within a day's travel. When the caravan rises again, the sun is higher, brighter, the air shimmering faintly above the dunes. Heat reflects upward, brushing your face in warm waves. Yet despite this, the desert holds a strange beauty. Light drifts across the sand like silk, creating patterns that shift with every breeze. Tiny tracks from beetles and lizards crisscross the dunes, evidence of life hidden just beneath the surface. Occasionally, you spot a lone shrub clinging stubbornly to the earth, its roots deeper than its branches suggest. Hours pass in a gentle blend of footsteps, breathing, and the creak of leather. Time feels fluid here, stretched thin between one horizon and the next. By late afternoon, shadows lengthen, softening the harsh edges of the day. The heat loosens its grip, replaced by a breeze that carries with it a promise of evening. The caravan gradually slows as the leader scans the land for a suitable place to stop. When he finds it, a slight rise sheltered by a curve of stone, the group settles with a shared sigh of relief. Fires spark to life in small clusters, their smoke rising in thin trails. The smell of simple meals, dates, flatbread, lentils warmed in a pot, mingles pleasantly with the cooling air. You sit among the others, stretching sore muscles, feeling the sand's lingering warmth beneath your hands. Conversations return, gentle and unhurried, now that the day's hardest walking is done. As the sky darkens, the desert transforms into something softer, more intimate. The stars appear in quiet succession. First a handful, then dozens, then hundreds, until the sky becomes a vast shimmering canopy that seems impossibly close. The night is neither silent nor empty. It hums with the faint movements of distant creatures and the fluttering of wind through dunes. You feel the coolness settling into your clothes. Carried on a breeze that promises a calmer, quieter journey until morning. The fire crackles low beside you. Someone hums a melody that drifts lazily into the open night. And as you lie back on the sand, feeling the vastness above and the softness below, the desert's nighttime world begins to unfold, drawing you gently toward the quiet mysteries waiting in the darkness ahead. Evening settles fully over the land, wrapping the caravan in a soft, bluish calm. The fires burn lower now, their flames no longer reaching upward, but folding into themselves, glowing like small embers tucked into the heart of the desert. Around those circles of light, people shift into patterns that seem older than memory. Quiet motions, steady voices, gentle laughter fading into the stillness. This is the first true encampment of the journey, a place where the caravan allows itself to breathe. You walk slowly among the clusters of travelers, feeling the sand cool beneath your feet. Some pilgrims sit facing the horizon, whispering their prayers as the last thin streak of daylight disappears. Others kneel beside their camels, brushing dust from the animals' coats, checking straps, smoothing blankets. The animals make low, rumbling sounds of contentment, their burdens temporarily lifted. Even the restless young camels seem subdued, lulled by the softness of the night. Near one of the fires, a man tells a story to a small group, his voice strong and unhurried, rising and falling like a familiar song. You pause at the edge of the circle, listening as he speaks of his first pilgrimage many years ago, before his beard turned silver. His tale isn't dramatic or extraordinary, but the listeners lean in with quiet eagerness. Out here, even the simplest memory feels like a gift. The firelight dances across the man's face, catching the lines around his eyes, adding a warmth that makes his presence feel both wise and comforting. A young boy, sitting beside him, stares upward, his mouth slightly open. When you follow his gaze, you understand why. The sky above is almost overwhelming in its beauty. An endless spread of stars so dense, so bright, that it feels as though the heavens have descended to hover just above your reach. The Milky Way stretches across the darkness like a river of white dust, shimmering gently. You can see it more clearly here than you ever have at home, as though the desert has peeled back the veil between earth and sky. The older woman with the carved staff settles down near you. She sighs softly as she lowers herself to the sand, muttering something about age and long days of walking, but she smiles nonetheless. She leans her staff beside her and begins to unwrap a small cloth bundle containing a handful of dates. Without a word, she offers you one. You accept, and she nods with satisfaction before taking one for herself. For a moment, you sit together in companionable silence, chewing slowly, savoring the sweetness after a long day. Not far away, a group of pilgrims gather together to perform the night prayer. Their voices rise in gentle recitation, steady, harmonious, blending with the soft crackle of the fire and the distant grumbling of camels. You join them, feeling the familiar motions anchor you, aligning your heart with the quiet intentions of those beside you. When the prayer ends, the world feels even more peaceful, as though the desert itself has paused to listen. Later, you help distribute water from the larger skins stored on one of the supply camels. The leader had spoken earlier about sharing resources carefully, ensuring that every person drinks enough during the night and conserves enough for the morning. You watch people fill their cups or bowls, thanking the carrier before stepping aside for the next in line. There is no competition, no rush, only a steady understanding that survival here depends on one another. When you finally return to your resting place, the fire beside you has softened to a warm glow. You spread your small mat on the sand, adjusting it so your head rests near a slight rise in the ground. The breeze lifts the edge of your garment, brushing your skin with a coolness that feels refreshing after the intensity of the day. You exhale slowly, letting your body sink into the earth, the muscles in your legs still humming from the long walk. Above you, the stars shimmer like scattered gold dust. They seem impossibly close, as though if you reached out with enough courage, you might brush your fingertips across their glowing surfaces. The desert at night is never truly silent. You hear faint rustlings, distant calls from unseen animals, the gentle murmur of someone finishing a late prayer. Your eyelids grow heavier with each passing breath. The stories, the prayers, the quiet motions of tending animals, all of it settles inside you like a gentle weight, grounding you, preparing you for what lies ahead. The desert may be peaceful now, but its challenges are waiting just beyond the horizon. As you drift toward sleep, the stars watch over you, steady and calm, and the whisper of wind across the dunes hints softly at the trials the next day will bring, guiding your dreams toward the coming heat and hardship that tomorrow is sure to unfold. Morning comes not with the gentle glow of yesterday, but with a sharper, more insistent light. You feel it even before opening your eyes, the warmth seeping into the sand beneath you, the tautness of the air, the faint dryness in your throat. The stars have faded, replaced by a sky so pale it almost seems bleached. You rise slowly, brushing grains of sand from your clothes, already sensing that the day ahead will test you in ways the night never could. The caravan prepares in near silence. People move with a shared understanding, conserving their voices and energy. Water skins are checked, tightened, weighed by hand to judge their remaining supply. Scarves are wrapped higher over faces to shield against the inevitable glare. Even the camels stand quietly, aware of the sun's growing intensity, before it even crests the horizon. The first steps of the day feel manageable. The air still holds a whisper of leftover coolness, and the shadows of the dunes stretch long and thin across your path. But as the sun rises, its warmth transforms into something heavier. The sand beneath your feet softens, absorbing and radiating heat with each passing minute. The horizon wavers, its edges blurring in shimmering waves. You begin to understand why the caravan leader insisted on the early departure. Every moment that passes draws the sun closer to its fiercest point. The heat is not a sudden thing. It builds gradually, pressing against your back, creeping beneath your clothes, clinging to your breath. It is the kind of heat that makes the air feel thick, as though each inhale carries the weight of the desert itself. Your feet sink deeper into the warming sand, forcing your muscles to work harder for each step. Speaking feels unnecessary, almost wasteful, when every drop of moisture in your mouth feels precious. The caravan adapts without instruction. Travelers spread out just slightly to give one another more room to breathe. Strides grow shorter, bodies more deliberate. The older woman with the carved staff walks beside you for a while, her breaths steady but slower than yesterday. She does not complain. She simply adjusts her scarf and continues forward, her determination anchoring you in your own. By midday, the sun seems to fill the entire sky. There is no direction you can turn to escape it. The sand reflects the glare upward, making you squint even when your eyes are nearly closed. A young boy, walking ahead, begins to stumble, and his father quickly supports him, offering a sip of water and a few soft words of encouragement. No one stops unless absolutely necessary, but everyone watches out for one another, small acts of care woven seamlessly into the trudging rhythm. Then comes the wind. It arrives first as a subtle shift, the faint rustle of sand against your ankles, the fluttering edge of your scarf. Within minutes, the breeze grows stronger, sweeping across the dunes in a steady current. You hear someone call out a warning. The leader raises his staff and gestures for everyone to tighten their coverings. The sandstorm forms not as a towering wall, but as a swirling veil that blurs your vision and stings your skin. Sand whips through the air, peppering your face and arms. You pull your scarf tight across your nose and mouth, lowering your head to shield your eyes. The world becomes a narrow band of shifting shapes and indistinct shadows. The sound of sand hissing across the earth is relentless, like 1,000 tiny beads striking the desert floor. Despite the storm's intensity, the caravan holds together. Voices call out, not in panic, but in guidance. Hands reach forward or behind to ensure no one loses their place. The camels groan and sway, but their handlers soothe them with steady words, guiding them through the worst of it. It is a trial, not of strength alone, but of unity. When the wind finally begins to ease, the relief is immediate but quiet. No one celebrates. There is only the collective exhale of people who endured something together. The air clears slowly, revealing a landscape slightly reshaped. Dunes shifted, footprints erased. It is as though the desert has rearranged itself in your absence. The caravan pushes on, weary but still moving, until the faint green of an oasis appears in the distance. At first, it seems like a trick of the heat, a smear of color against an endless canvas of gold. But as you draw closer, the shapes come into focus. Clustered palms, patches of shade, and the shimmer of water reflecting the low sun. When you finally reach it, the oasis feels like a mercy. The coolness beneath the trees is gentle and soothing, and the sound of water trickling fills the air with life. Travelers kneel to wash their faces, refill their skins, and breathe deeply for the first time all day. The camels lower their heads to drink, their bodies relaxing into the evening calm. As the sky darkens and the camp settles once more, voices return, soft, grateful, relieved. The gathering at the oasis becomes its own small world, a pocket of rest carved out of the harshness of the day. And as you sit beneath the swaying palms, listening to the murmur of conversation and the splash of water, the night begins to shape itself into a new kind of stillness, inviting you gently toward what tomorrow may bring. The oasis seems to breathe with the caravan, absorbing the exhaustion of the day and returning something gentler in its place. Evening settles among the palms like a familiar friend, cool and shaded, carrying the comforting scent of damp earth and sweet water. After the punishing heat and the storm's wild sting, this place feels almost unreal. A soft, green interruption in a world made of sand. Travelers scatter naturally into small circles, each claiming a patch of shade beneath the rustling fronds. Camels kneel near the water's edge, their legs folded neatly beneath them as they drink in long, grateful pulls. Their handlers splash water across their faces and necks, whispering to them with quiet affection. The animals nuzzle back, as if offering their own silent thanks. You refill your water skin alongside others at the spring, passing it down the line so each pilgrim may fill theirs in turn. The water is cold, startlingly so, and when you bring a handful to your lips, it carries the taste of minerals and stone. It feels like it reaches deeper than your throat, cooling a place inside you that had been burning all day. For a while, no one speaks. The relief is too profound, too sacred in its own way. But as strength returns, so does conversation. The oasis warms with voices, laughter, and the soft sound of stories being exchanged. Exhaustion gives everything a dreamlike softness, and even simple tales feel special beneath the shelter of the palms. A group of merchants sits on woven mats, their goods piled nearby. One gestures animatedly as he recounts a mishap involving a stubborn camel that refused to move until offered a fig. The listeners laugh, the sound rising like a flutter of birds. A young woman from a distant tribe tells of her first time seeing the desert at dawn and how she mistook the morning wind for the breath of jinn. Another shares a poetic reflection on the long road behind and the longer road ahead, her words gentle and rhythmic, lulling those around her into a quiet reverence. You move among these gatherings, absorbing the patchwork of dialects and accents. Here, a group from Yemen debates which spices travel best in the heat. There, men from a northern tribe joke about how their thick cloaks, so useful in winter, now feel like burdens made of fire. The blend of languages and customs is mesmerizing. The way people from distant lands find common ground and shared purpose. Strangers lean in, smiling, nodding, adjusting their seating as though welcoming guests into their own homes. Near one of the larger fires, a storyteller begins to speak. He is older, his face lined like weathered parchment, his eyes sharp despite fatigue. His audience forms quickly. His stories dance between humor and wisdom. Tales of caravans past, of pilgrims who overcame storms much worse than today's, of misunderstandings turned into lifelong friendships. Even those tending the camels pause to listen, letting his words drift through the oasis like a gentle breeze. As night deepens, the fires cast warm pools of light across the sand. Shadows sway among the palms, stretching and shrinking with each spark that jumps from the flames. The conversations soften, but do not fade completely. The oasis remains alive, humming with the shared relief of travelers who survived another day. You sit at the edge of one of the gatherings, enjoying the peace. A passing traveler, a man dressed in robes dyed a deep, almost indigo blue, pauses nearby. He adjusts the strap of a small pack over his shoulder, clearly preparing to depart alone. His face is lean, his expression thoughtful. When he notices you watching, he offers a nod. "I travel ahead of the larger groups," he says, his voice low, touched with the accent of the far west. Faster, but not without risk. You ask him what kind of risk, and he tilts his head slightly, as though choosing his words. "Some territories ahead are unsettled," he replies. "Tribes with old disputes. They don't trouble pilgrims without cause, but misunderstandings occur. Keep to your caravan. Listen to your leader. These lands reward unity and punish wandering." He offers a faint, knowing smile. "And may your journey remain peaceful." With that, he steps into the darkness beyond the firelight, his figure blending into the night until he becomes only a distant shape moving with purpose. His words linger, quiet but unmistakably serious. You feel the weight of them settle beside the warmth of the stories, reminding you that the desert holds not just beauty and companionship, but tension and uncertainty as well. As the last conversations drift into murmurs and the fires sink into glowing embers, the oasis becomes a cradle of soft breaths and rustling leaves. The night carries you gently toward rest, wrapping you in its coolness. But somewhere in the distance, beyond the comfort of the palms, the desert waits, vast, unpredictable, and alive with the unseen movements of tribes and shurks and travelers. And as you settle down to sleep, that awareness hums faintly beneath your calm, guiding your thoughts toward whatever lies hidden in the lands ahead. Morning arrives with a subtle change in the air, cooler than expected, carrying the faint scent of dust that has traveled far. The oasis, which felt so alive the night before, now stirs with quieter purpose as travelers gather their belongings, refill their skins one last time, and prepare to return to the vast openness of the desert. The memory of the indigo-robed traveler's warning lingers like a soft echo as the caravan readies itself. You sense it in the careful way people tighten their packs, in the way the leader surveys the land with narrowed eyes. As the caravan moves out from the protective circle of palms, the world opens again, stretching into rolling dunes and scattered rocky plains. The landscape shifts subtly, becoming harsher, less forgiving. The sun rises behind you, casting long shadows forward, as though the path ahead is being drawn in ink. You fall into the familiar cadence of the march, but there is a new tension among the travelers, an awareness that the land you are entering is not empty, not neutral, but home to tribes whose loyalties, histories, and grudges run deeper than the desert itself. The leader raises his hand, calling for a slow pace. He walks at the front with two other men, both familiar with regional customs. Occasionally, they murmur quietly to one another, pointing to distant hills or low clusters of rocks that mark the invisible boundaries of tribal lands. You begin to understand that the desert is not simply open ground. It is divided into territories shaped by lineage, alliances, and rivalries long predating the caravan's journey. By midday, the caravan approaches a low ridge where figures wait. Three men in traditional tribal garb, mounted on sturdy camels, watching your approach with an unreadable stillness. Their presence halts the caravan almost instinctively. The leader steps forward, carrying nothing but a staff and an open expression of respect. The men on the ridge descend to meet him. Their camels move with practiced grace, kicking up small spirals of sand. A quiet spreads through the caravan, tension hanging like a thin thread. You watch as greetings are exchanged, formal, deliberate, each phrase chosen with care. Though you cannot hear every word, you recognize the tone. A negotiation shaped by tradition, humility, and the shared belief that travelers deserve protection, but that respect for tribal rights must be honored. One of the mounted men speaks more sharply, his expression tightening. His companions watch him closely. The caravan leader responds calmly, his hands open at his sides, no sign of threat in his posture. A long moment stretches between them. A young pilgrim beside you shifts nervously, his fingers twisting the edge of his scarf. Then, as quickly as tension rose, it softens. The stern-faced tribesman nods once, firmly. The leader bows his head in acknowledgement. The two other tribesmen relax visibly, their rigid shoulders loosening. The conversation continues with gentler tones, gestures becoming more fluid. Whatever uncertainty existed dissolves into a shared understanding. A few women from the caravan step forward with modest gifts, dried dates, a small pouch of spices, a piece of woven cloth. These offerings are accepted not as payment, but as signs of goodwill, symbols of the caravan's peaceful intent. In return, one of the tribesmen hands over a water skin filled with fresh well water from their land, and another offers a piece of advice about the safest path through the next valley, warning of a place where shifting winds can bury tracks within minutes. The caravan feels different after the exchange. Not lighter exactly, but connected. You sense the importance of these moments, the way survival hinges not just on endurance, but on relationships, on knowing how to step into another's land with humility. Later that day, the caravan comes upon a small encampment belonging to the same tribe. Instead of hostility, you are met with gestures of welcome. A woman grinding grain invites a few pilgrims to sit in the shade of her tent. A young man offers water to the camels. The children stare at the pilgrims with wide eyes before inching closer, curiosity overtaking shyness. There is no feast, no elaborate celebration, just simple, genuine hospitality. You sit in the shade with others, sharing a bowl of milk infused with herbs, its coolness soothing your dry throat. The tribespeople speak of their lives, their flocks, their journeys across the desert. Their voices are steady, proud, without boasting. You feel the invisible borders of the land, not as lines of division, but as living stories carried by the people who guard them. When the caravan prepares to leave, goodbyes are exchanged with warmth. One of the tribesmen you met earlier claps the leader's shoulder with a quiet laugh, a gesture that would have seemed impossible just hours before. You realize how quickly strangers become allies in a place where survival depends on mutual respect. As the caravan moves forward, leaving the tribal encampment behind, the mood softens. The earlier tension has eased into something calmer, more grounded. People walk closer together now, talking in low voices, sharing impressions of the morning's encounter. Bonds form more naturally after shared uncertainty. Your companions feel a little less like strangers and a little more like a community woven together by trust. And as the sun begins its slow descent, casting golden light across the sand, you notice the gentle shift in the caravan's energy, a sense of companionship growing stronger with each step into the evening's calm. The caravan moves into the cooling hours of the afternoon with a steadier, more relaxed rhythm. The earlier tension has dissolved into something almost tender, an awareness that you've crossed an invisible threshold together. That shared uncertainty can soften the distance between strangers. The footsteps around you seem to fall more closely in sync, voices rising more freely now that the desert's mood has eased. The land ahead stretches smooth and open, the sky washed in soft amber, inviting conversation to blossom where silence once held sway. You find yourself walking beside the young student of Scripture who has been part of the caravan since the first morning. He carries a small leather pouch of handwritten verses tucked safely beneath his robe, a keepsake from his teacher. His sandals are worn thin, patched in places, yet he walks with a bright eagerness that makes his movements almost buoyant. He speaks with a quiet passion about the lessons he's memorizing, about the way each verse seems to settle into him differently when recited under the vast sky instead of inside a study hall. He admits, with a sheepish grin, that the desert makes him feel smaller than he expected, but also more awake. Not long after, the merchant joins the two of you. He's a seasoned traveler with eyes narrowed from years of sun, his beard flecked with early strands of gray. His steps are measured, steady, as though he knows exactly how to preserve his strength for the long road ahead. He shares stories of his previous journeys, some through peaceful lands, others through treacherous passes where one wrong turn could strand an entire caravan. He tells them with a playful flourish, widening his gestures just enough to make the young student laugh and pretend to stumble in mock fear. You find yourself smiling too, the heaviness of the desert momentarily lifting as the three of you trade small jokes and observations. When the path narrows between low ridges, you fall nearer to the elderly woman with the carved staff. She walks with determination, each step a quiet act of will. Her staff, though light, bears the mark of many years. Sand-polished grooves, faded carvings spiraling like the pattern of distant waves. She shares her story without embellishment. She has waited decades to make this pilgrimage. Family responsibilities, poor harvests, illness, each year held a different obstacle. But now, with her children grown and her strength still holding, she has finally set out. There is a softness in her voice, but beneath it lies a fire that surprises you. Her eyes shine when she speaks of Mecca, as though the city's sacred air is already filling her lungs. As the hours pass, these companions begin to feel familiar. You learn small things about them. The merchant's habit of humming under his breath, the student's tendency to talk with his hands, the elderly woman's quiet laugh that emerges only when something truly amuses her. The desert feels less lonely with their presence. Even the camels seem calmer, walking with the same unspoken ease that passes through the group. When the sun dips low, staining the dunes with streaks of bronze and rose, conversation deepens. The student asks what each of you imagines the Kaaba will feel like in person. The merchant answers thoughtfully, describing how his breath caught in his chest the first time he saw it rising from the heart of the sanctuary. Simple, powerful, steady as the pulse of the earth. The elderly woman listens closely, eyes softening, and admits she fears she will not know how to control her emotions when she sees it for the first time. Her voice wavers slightly, but her smile remains steady. The talk shifts naturally to what each hopes to leave behind in Mecca, and what each hopes to carry home. Dreams surface quietly, fresh starts, forgiveness, renewed purpose. The road itself seems to listen, the dunes catching the sound of each confession as though tucking them safely into their folds. As twilight slips into evening, the caravan comes to a slow halt on a gentle rise. Fires are prepared, mats laid out, camels relieved of their burdens. You sit with your companions again, sharing a simple meal of bread, softened in water, and a handful of dates. The darkness draws close, the stars brightening overhead in a patient unfurling. The conversations grow softer, drifting into memories and hopes that blur comfortably with the night air. In the glow of the small fire, the talk returns once more to Mecca. The student recites a verse he plans to repeat upon entering the sanctuary. The merchant speaks of the feeling of being part of a tide of believers moving in unison. The elderly woman closes her eyes, whispering a quiet prayer that the city will welcome her with the same peace she feels now. Their voices merge with the crackle of the flames and the distant murmur of the caravan settling in. And as you listen, gazing toward the dark horizon that hides the holy city, you feel yourself drawn toward the thought of approaching that sacred ground, the anticipation rising like a slow, steady tide inside you. The road had begun to shift. The familiar dust of the desert, fine and pale, gave way to a coarser, golden sand, dotted with acacia and resilient shrubs. Distant ridges rose like watchful sentinels, and beyond them, the first unmistakable outlines of hills and minarets hinted at the city that had drawn countless souls through centuries of devotion. With each mile, the air seemed to thrum more quietly, yet more insistently, as if the earth itself were preparing the heart to receive what was sacred. Travelers slowed, not out of fatigue, but out of reverence. Even the camels, attuned to the subtle rhythms of human emotion, seemed to tread more softly. Whispers of anticipation mingled with the wind, carrying fragments of prayers and the low, steady murmur of approaching pilgrims. Every eye turned toward the horizon, where the sprawling city awaited, an oasis of both the physical and spiritual, where faith and humanity converged. The narrator's reflections became quieter, internal. Approaching Mecca was not merely a journey of distance, but of intention. Every step forward demanded humility, a readiness to shed ego and to embrace the sacredness of the moment. One did not simply enter the city. One approached it with measured reverence, attuned to the unspoken rhythms of devotion. Etiquette became instinct, the lowering of voices, the subtle gestures of respect toward fellow travelers, the gentle acknowledgement of those whose paths had intersected in this pilgrimage. Stories had been passed down through generations of pilgrims, tales of moments when the first glimpse of the city's walls brought tears or a lump to the throat, or when a quiet prayer, whispered in the cool morning air, felt answered before it was fully spoken. The narrator, walking among these travelers, felt the weight of those stories not as obligation, but as guidance, a reminder of the inner journey that paralleled the physical one. Spiritual readiness, it seemed, was cultivated not in grand gestures, but in the quiet attunement to every footfall, every inhalation, every heartbeat. Along the route, landmarks emerged like markers on a sacred map. The hills bore names that echoed history, wells and resting places bore witness to centuries of devotion. Each step was a lesson in patience and presence. One learned, as the narrator had, to observe without haste, to listen without interruption, and to feel without claiming. Even the wind, carrying scents of distant spices and the faint tang of city fires, seemed to whisper reminders: humility before the divine, gratitude for the journey, and the courage to let go of distractions. Conversations among travelers turned quieter as the city drew near, shifting from small talk to reflections on purpose, faith, and the anticipation of standing within the most hallowed spaces on earth. Eyes met briefly and knowingly. There was an unspoken understanding among those who had walked similar paths. Even the young and inexperienced pilgrims instinctively mirrored the composure of the seasoned ones, aware that proximity to the sacred demanded a measured, mindful presence. As the sun climbed higher, its light glinting off distant walls, the narrator felt the heart quicken, though the pace of walking remained steady. The city was no longer a distant dream. It had become a living horizon, each step toward it laden with intention. Yet, the city itself remained just out of reach, its full majesty concealed behind gentle rises in the terrain and the folds of time-honored streets. This deliberate withholding was a gift. The outer world still required patience. The inner world still required preparation. By late afternoon, the outskirts of Mecca appeared in earnest. Minarets rose in serene dignity, and the hum of life, quiet but insistent, reached the travelers. There was a tension between anticipation and readiness, a recognition that the journey had brought them this far, Yet the true moment of communion lay just ahead. Here, on the edge of the city, the narrator paused. The gates, both literal and metaphorical, were near. The journey through dust, sweat, and reflection had led to this threshold where every expectation, every prayer, every lesson converged. It was here, on the outskirts, that one truly learned to stand still and let the sacred approach before stepping into the heart of Mecca itself. The horizon shimmered, a promise, a prelude, a beckoning. And with a final inhalation of the desert air, tinged with the scent of distant incense and devotion, the narrator prepared to cross into the city that had drawn the faithful for centuries. The outskirts stretched before them like a living tapestry, stitched with movement, color, and sound. From the ridge where they had paused, the city of Mecca revealed itself gradually, a labyrinth of narrow pathways, bustling markets, and the soft glimmer of sun on whitewashed walls. Dust swirled at the edges of strides, catching the light in golden spirals, and the voices of vendors and pilgrims mingled in a chorus that was at once earthly and reverent. Every corner seemed alive with anticipation, every shadow a whisper of stories older than memory. The narrator inhaled deeply, tasting the mixture of spices, sweat, and sacred expectation. Even at this distance, the city demanded a different kind of awareness. It was no longer the quiet desert where each step was measured against sand and sky. Here, the rhythm was dictated by the flow of people, the call of merchants, the subtle pulse of devotion that wove through the ordinary clamor. There was a hum beneath the noise, a vibration of the sacred touching the mundane that made the heart both tremble and expand. Pilgrims moved like threads in a pattern too intricate to grasp at once. Some carried provisions, others children, all bearing a visible weight of purpose. The narrator noted the careful balance of haste and patience. A man adjusting his turban to shield from dust, a woman guiding a child through a narrow alley, a youth pausing to gaze toward distant minarets as if seeing them for the first time. Each action was ordinary and extraordinary at once, a reminder that entering Mecca was not merely a physical passage, but a negotiation with the sacred. Markets along the main thoroughfare spilled into side streets, their colors and aromas overwhelming yet mesmerizing. Dates glistened in woven baskets, their surfaces catching light like polished amber. Brass lamps and copper pots reflected the sun in miniature sparks, and fabrics of every hue fluttered in the warm wind. Even as the narrator walked among the pilgrims, the city seemed to pulse ahead, calling attention to details one could not yet fully comprehend. To enter Mecca was to step into a living mosaic of faith, commerce, and human anticipation. Yet beneath the fascination, there was a humbler, quieter sensation, awe, and a trace of fear. The sacred weight of the city pressed gently, insistently. It was a city that demanded respect, that watched the intentions of those who entered. Every step carried a dual awareness of one's own readiness and of the centuries of devotion that had made the city a beacon. There was a trembling humility in recognizing that here, ordinary life and extraordinary faith converged, that the mundane rhythms of streets and markets were inseparable from the spiritual currents running beneath them. As the sun descended, casting long shadows across the rooftops and alleyways, the city's details softened into a palette of dusk. Lanterns flickered to life, their warm glow mingling with the fading light. Voices shifted from the urgency of business to the more reflective cadence of evening. Greetings, prayers, and the quiet steps of those settling for the night. The narrator's pace slowed, not from fatigue, but from a growing sense that the city itself asked for measured movement, patience, and presence. From this vantage between light and dark, between the outer world and the heart of Mecca, one could sense the threshold approaching. The narrow alleys would soon guide pilgrims into the innermost quarters, where preparation for the sacred rituals demanded both attention and surrender. The moment of Ihram loomed, yet still there was time to absorb the sights, the smells, the living pulse of a city that had welcomed countless faithful across centuries. Night crept steadily over Mecca, folding the dust and light into shadow, softening edges, and highlighting points of illumination. Flickering lamps, the glint of polished metal, the subtle shimmer of prayer beads in hands lifted to the heavens. Here, on the city's threshold, the narrator paused once more, aware of the delicate balance between anticipation and preparation. To enter fully, spiritually and physically, required patience, intention, and a heart wide open to the weight of the sacred. The city waited. As night settled over the city, the streets softened into shadow and amber lamplight, and the air carried a gentle hush. The bustling markets of the day had yielded to quiet alleys, and the hum of the faithful became a slower, more measured rhythm. Here, on the threshold of Mecca's inner sanctums, the narrator paused, taking in the moment before stepping fully into the sacred. The next step would not be measured in distance, but in intention. The entry into Ihram. The rituals were subtle yet profound, a delicate layering of the physical and spiritual. The simple act of donning the Ihram garments, a seamless white cloth draped over the shoulders and around the body, felt like shedding the ordinary self. There was no embellishment, no distinction of wealth or status. The fabric flattened differences, creating a unity of purpose among all pilgrims. The narrator moved slowly, deliberately, aware that this clothing was more than a garment. It was a symbol of surrender, humility, and readiness to embrace the sacred journey ahead. Preparation began with cleansing and reflection, a ritual washing that left both body and mind open to devotion. Each movement was mindful. The careful washing of hands, face, and feet, the deliberate brushing of hair, and adjustment of the cloth. In these small acts, a profound transformation occurred. The ordinary concerns of travel, dust, fatigue, hunger, were acknowledged but set aside. Here, in the quiet of ritual, the heart learned to slow, to focus on intention, and to recognize that every action carried a sacred weight. Restrictions of the Ihram became clear, not as burdens, but as guides to inner clarity. One refrained from harming living creatures, from quarrels, from indulgences that might distract from the spiritual journey. Even speech and thought were tempered, shaped by a gentle discipline that encouraged reflection and humility. The narrator felt the subtle shift within, a movement from external attention to inward awareness, from observation to participation, from the self to a shared devotion that extended across centuries of pilgrims. Intentions were spoken softly, yet with full awareness, forming a bridge between the outer world and the inner self. Each word echoed in the quiet night, mingling with the prayers of others, invisible yet palpable. This moment of articulation was not a performance, but a covenant, a promise to approach the sacred with sincerity, to respect the boundaries of the ritual, and to allow the pilgrimage to shape both mind and heart. The narrator sensed a deep alignment, a quiet hum beneath the conscious awareness that signaled the internal shift from traveler to pilgrim. The world outside seemed to transform in tandem with this inner change. Streets that had felt ordinary now carried weight. Shadows lengthened with meaning, and the faint scent of incense and distant cooking fires became infused with the sacred. Fellow pilgrims moved with a shared rhythm, their footsteps a gentle echo of intention and devotion. The narrator walked among them with a heightened consciousness, noticing the subtle gestures of respect and the careful attentiveness to the state of ihram in each face, each gesture, each sigh of anticipation. Time became pliant, stretching and contracting with each mindful breath. The rituals, though simple in action, held a depth that could only be felt, not described. The mind and body synchronized, an unspoken promise to honor the sacred boundaries, to act with purity of intention, and to open fully to the journey that lay ahead. The narrator understood that entering Ihram was both a preparation and a transformation, a threshold where the pilgrimage truly began, where every subsequent step would carry the weight and sanctity of this moment. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, the inner shift was complete. The city, now bathed in soft pre-dawn light, seemed to recognize this change. The narrator felt a quiet steadiness, a readiness to move forward, to follow the alleys and pathways that led toward the heart of Mecca. Every step would now be both physical and spiritual, guided by intention, humility, and devotion. The threshold had been crossed, the pilgrim had been formed, and the journey toward the Kaaba, the ultimate destination of longing and reverence, was poised to begin. The night yielded to the first soft light of day, and with it, the path to the Kaaba stretched ahead, a promise of awe and sacred encounter. The first rays of morning stretched across Mecca, brushing rooftops and alleys with soft gold. After the quiet night of preparation in Ihram, the narrator moved through the city with measured steps, each footfall both deliberate and reverent. The streets had settled into a gentle rhythm. The hum of pilgrims now carried a singular focus. Every gaze seemed drawn forward, as if the city itself guided hearts toward one point, one presence, the Kaaba. Emerging from the narrower lanes, the narrator saw it for the first time. The Kaaba, standing simply yet powerfully in its 7th century form, unadorned beyond its smooth stone and solid timbers, yet imbued with a gravity that made the air itself seem heavier. It was unpretentious, stark in its lines, yet nothing in the world demanded such attention, such awe. A sense of quiet authority emanated from it, not in display, but in the sheer presence of enduring sanctity. Time seemed to fold. Centuries of devotion, whispers of prayers, footsteps of pilgrims, and the echo of countless souls merged into the space around it. The narrator's own heart responded with a steadiness born of reverence. There was no rush to touch the walls, no need for grand gestures. Simply to be present was enough. Around the Kaaba, pilgrims moved in harmonious flow, a gentle tide of devotion and surrender. Faces reflected every stage of emotion, tears glinting in early morning light, whispers of prayer, quiet smiles of awe, and solemn bows that seemed to speak to eternity itself. Even in their movements, there was a deep grace, a synchronization of intention and humility that left the narrator both observing and part of a larger, shared consciousness. The simplicity of the Kaaba made the heart attentive to subtler details. The faint roughness of the stone, the sharp clarity of the horizon behind it, the whisper of wind across the courtyard. Every sound seemed magnified, yet softened. Every movement of a pilgrim, a small act of cosmic alignment. The narrator felt the pulse of devotion as a quiet vibration beneath the surface of perception, a steady reminder that the sacred was not distant or abstract, but here, immediate and transformative. Other pilgrims approached, each encounter unique yet unified by shared purpose. A man knelt in silent prayer, hands raised, head bowed, eyes closed. A woman traced a finger along the wall, a gesture at once personal and timeless. Children moved hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Observing these acts, the narrator felt both humility and clarity, the inner world aligning with the outer presence. Here, the self became both small and expansive, an individual participant in a continuum of devotion that transcended time. The approach to the Kaaba required stillness as much as motion. Each step forward was measured, attentive to the flow of the pilgrims, attentive to one's own heart. The courtyard seemed vast, yet intimate, holding countless souls while allowing each person a private communion. Breathing slowed, senses sharpened, and the mind settled into a rare clarity. Even the distant calls to prayer, carried on the gentle morning wind, seemed absorbed into the stillness, enhancing rather than disturbing it. As the narrator drew closer, the energy of anticipation shifted naturally into action. The tawaf, the circumambulation around the Kaaba, began. Pilgrims moved in steady circles, their steps echoing the rhythm of centuries. Each rotation carried intention, humility, and devotion, transforming motion into meditation. The narrator felt a steady surge of participation, a quiet joy in belonging, a solemn awareness of the sacred choreography unfolding. Standing before the Kaaba, ready to begin the tawaf, the narrator paused briefly to absorb the scene, the stillness, the gentle flow of pilgrims, the presence of something greater than oneself. The heart had steadied, the mind had opened, and the body was poised in reverent motion. This was the threshold of encounter, where intention met presence, where centuries of devotion merged with the personal, transformative experience of being before the Kaaba. The first steps of the tawaf beckoned, carrying forward the journey of sacred alignment and quiet awe, setting the stage for the next chapter, where motion and devotion would intertwine in the living ritual of pilgrimage. The moment to begin, the tawaf arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. The narrator felt the steady pulse of anticipation dissolve into rhythmic motion, as if the air itself guided the steps. One foot before the other, the flow of pilgrims created a seamless river of movement, circling the Kaaba in measured devotion. Each breath aligned with the gentle pace, each heartbeat echoing the centuries of worship that had carved this ritual into the fabric of time. The first steps felt deliberate, grounding, an invitation to inhabit both the body and the spirit fully. Sand and stone beneath the feet were tangible reminders of the earthly plane, while the presence of the Kaaba called the mind upward. With every rotation, the motion became meditative. Eyes softened to take in the vast courtyard, the flowing robes, the bowed heads, the whispered prayers drifting on the wind. The narrator noticed how the crowd moved almost as a single organism, yet each soul maintained its intimate dialogue with the sacred. The rhythm of tawaf was subtle, yet profound. Left foot, right foot. Step, pause, inhale, exhale. The air carried hints of incense, distant lantern smoke, and the faint fragrance of desert winds mixing with the presence of thousands of pilgrims. Voices rose and fell in murmured supplications, blending into a collective hum that neither dominated nor dissolved individuality. The narrator became aware of every detail: the warmth of sunlight on skin, the gentle brush of robes as pilgrims passed, the faint clatter of sandals on stone, the scent of devotion lingering in the air. Time folded in a gentle, almost imperceptible way. Circling became less about distance traveled and more about alignment of intention, heart, and presence. The body moved automatically. The mind observed without clinging. The spirit quietly absorbed. Each rotation seemed to echo the eternal, the movement of countless pilgrims across centuries mirrored in this single, flowing moment. The narrator felt a quiet humility, a steadying awareness that the sacred was not only ahead, but surrounding, enveloping, permeating every breath and every step. Around them, the crowd moved with the same careful awareness. Children held close to their parents' sides, elderly pilgrims leaning on steady companions, young men and women walking with a mixture of excitement and solemnity, all contributing to the flowing rhythm of devotion. The narrator felt both part of this movement and distinctly conscious of the individual prayers within it. There was an energy, neither frantic nor static, but a harmonious pulse that underscored the unity of purpose. As the rotations continued, attention deepened. The heart measured each lap not in quantity, but in quality, in the steadiness of breath, the openness of mind, the sincerity of intent. With every pass, the Kaaba remained the silent center, constant and grounding. The rhythm carried not only the body, but the spirit, moving it through layers of reverence, gratitude, and awe. There was an intimacy in this simplicity, a profound transformation through repetition, focus, and devotion. Eventually, the tawaf drew to a close. The final steps were slower, more deliberate, a lingering acknowledgement of the Kaaba's enduring presence. The narrator felt a gentle settling of the body and spirit, a sense of completion tempered by anticipation. The circular motion had prepared both mind and heart for the next phase, Sa'i, the sacred walk between Safa and Marwa. The rhythm of Tawaf had opened awareness, steadying the breath and focusing the intention for the continued journey. Stepping back from the flow of the crowd, the narrator observed pilgrims adjusting their garments, whispering brief prayers, and readying themselves for the next act of devotion. The courtyard seemed to pulse with the echoes of completed rotations, a quiet resonance that lingered even as movement slowed. Tawaf had ended, yet its energy remained, a gentle undercurrent guiding toward the Sa'i. The narrator inhaled deeply, feeling the weight and gift of the ritual, and began moving toward the path that would carry the pilgrim between Safa and Marwa, toward the continuation of sacred motion. Each step along that path would be measured, attentive, and mindful, carrying forward the devotion that Tawaf had awakened and preparing for the next chapter of journey, both physical and spiritual. Leaving the courtyard behind, the narrator stepped onto the path that stretched between Safa and Marwa, the hills that had witnessed a story older than memory. The rhythm of Tawaf lingered in the body, a steady pulse of intention, grounding each step. Here, the movement was different, linear, back and forth, yet no less sacred. With each stride, the past and present intertwined, drawing the pilgrim into Hajar's journey, her search for water, her faith in what seemed impossible, and the miraculous provision that had flowed from the earth itself. The first steps toward Safa felt like entering both history and narrative. The hill rose gently ahead, stone worn smooth by countless feet, each indentation a subtle testament to devotion. Pilgrims moved with a shared purpose, yet each carried their private prayers, whispers of hope and humility. The narrator noticed the variation in gait and posture. Some hurried lightly, emulating Hajar's urgency. Others walked slowly, eyes lowered, letting the weight of reflection deepen with every step. The path itself seemed alive, vibrating with centuries of faith, echoing the resilience and determination of a mother searching for sustenance. Arriving at Safa, the narrator paused, looking across the narrow valley toward Marwa. The distance seemed short, yet symbolic, a span of human striving and divine presence. The first ascent was a quiet meditation, hands brushing stone, breaths drawn slowly, minds turning inward. Pilgrims paused to lift their hearts in prayer, their eyes closed, lips moving softly. Even in silence, there was a communion with the story of Hajar, the relentless trust, and the unfolding miracle. Every motion, step, and pause felt intentional, each footfall carrying both historical memory and contemporary devotion. The back and forth began, a rhythmic motion echoing the persistence of faith. Each return toward Safa, each journey toward Marwa, mirrored the emotional cadence of hope and reassurance. Steps quickened slightly along the central stretch as tradition suggested, yet the narrator moved with mindfulness, savoring the oscillation between exertion and reflection. The hills themselves seemed to hold attention, rising gently like sentinels, grounding the pilgrim in a tangible sense of history and spiritual presence. Along the way, pilgrims passed one another with gentle acknowledgments, a nod, a quiet smile, a brief whispered prayer. There was no rush to complete the circuit. The pace was dictated not by urgency, but by attention, presence, and a shared rhythm. Each repetition reinforced humility, persistence, and gratitude. The narrator felt the body moving in concert with both the story and the collective energy of devotion, the mind absorbing the lessons of endurance, trust, and reliance on the divine. Breath became the measure of spiritual motion. Inhale with effort, exhale with release, each cycle carrying prayer and reflection. The path between the hills was both physical and symbolic, a corridor of transformation. With every step, fatigue blended with exhilaration, intention with surrender. The landscape around, stone, sand, and sparse desert vegetation, remained simple, yet its significance deepened with every movement. The hills were both destination and teacher, their silent presence guiding the rhythm and fortifying the heart. Completion approached as the final ascent toward Marwa drew near. The narrator's feet were weary, yet each step carried a satisfaction born of devotion, fulfilled, and connection maintained. Standing atop the last rise, gazing back toward Safa, there was a quiet sense of closure, a release of tension, a humility tempered by achievement. The cycle of Sa'i had concluded, yet the lessons, trust, persistence, and presence remained, inscribed within body, mind, and heart. The pilgrims paused briefly, collecting themselves, adjusting garments, and breathing in the moment. Relief and quiet joy mingled, yet the spiritual weight of the ritual lingered, a soft echo of what had been traversed. The narrator felt grounded, centered, and aware of the continuity of faith that spanned generations. The body had labored, the spirit had expanded, the heart had opened. With one final exhale, the Sa'i concluded, leaving both motion and emotion poised to continue into the next phase of the sacred journey. The path ahead shimmered with anticipation, the next chapter of rituals awaiting. Step by step, breath by breath, the pilgrimage continued, each act a bridge between devotion and discovery. As the final steps of Sa'i settled into memory, the narrator withdrew from the courtyard and alleys into a quiet corner of Mecca, seeking rest after the exertion of ritual. The city, which had pulsed with devotion throughout the day, now softened into a gentle hush. The dust-laden streets reflected the fading light of lanterns, and the distant minarets cast long, serene shadows over rooftops and alleyways. In this stillness, the weight of the pilgrimage, the steps, the prayers, the repetition began to diffuse into a tranquil awareness, a gentle quiet in body and mind. Pilgrims gathered quietly around small meals, sharing bread, dates, and water, yet speaking in subdued tones, careful not to disturb the sacred calm of night. Conversations were brief, reflective, often interspersed with prayer. The narrator observed how simple acts, passing a cup of water, offering a blanket, or a nod of encouragement, held a depth of compassion and solidarity. Each interaction was a subtle reinforcement of the journey's shared humanity, a reminder that devotion was both individual and communal. The air was heavy with the fragrance of night, the faint, dry scent of sand, the residual warmth of the day's sun on stone, and the distant trace of incense burning near small prayer spaces. The narrator lingered in these sensory impressions, letting each detail root attention in the present. Even the soft murmur of others' prayers or the rustle of garments as pilgrims settled onto mats became part of the meditation, a tapestry of quiet devotion. Every sound, every scent, every shadow carried significance, as if the city itself had exhaled and invited the faithful to mirror its calm. Rest came not only to the body, but also to the mind. The exhaustion of ritual, the steady, intentional motion of tawaf and sa'i had opened the heart, leaving a residue of humility, awe, and gratitude. The narrator felt each breath expand slowly, the chest rising and falling like the gentle waves of a calm sea. Thoughts drifted, unbidden yet unhurried, observing rather than clinging. Memories of the Kaaba, the hills of Safa and Marwa, the faces of fellow pilgrims, all moved through consciousness like lanterns floating in a darkened courtyard. Throughout the night, occasional pilgrim footsteps echoed softly, the distant prayer calls from nearby mosques carrying a gentle resonance over the rooftops. These sounds were not interruptions, but threads in the tapestry of stillness. The narrator noticed a subtle interplay of solitude and connection, each individual at rest, yet each heartbeat in silent accord with countless others in the city, past and present. It was a quiet affirmation that the pilgrimage extended beyond the physical journey, encompassing shared spiritual space, memory, and intention. As midnight deepened, some pilgrims rose for private reflection, their whispered prayers folding into the stillness. The narrator remained seated, letting the quiet settle into bones and heart alike. Gratitude flowed quietly, without speech or ceremony, a simple acknowledgement of guidance, perseverance, and the sacred presence that had accompanied every step. In these hours, the rhythm of Mecca, so intense during the day, softened into a slow, steady pulse, carrying both reassurance and anticipation for the journey yet to unfold. Dawn crept gently over the horizon, softening the shadows, gilding the rooftops, and stirring a muted chorus of life. The city began to shift once more, not abruptly, but gradually, as footsteps, prayers, and murmurs returned with the promise of a new day. The narrator sensed the transition from the stillness of night to the purposeful momentum of morning. The body felt rested, the mind alert, and the heart aligned with the continuing rhythm of devotion. The first call to prayer hinted at the next stage of the pilgrimage. Sleep and reflection had prepared the spirit for movement once again. The quiet of night had given way to anticipation of the journey toward Mina, the next passage, both physical and spiritual, awaiting pilgrims as the city stirred. The soft light of dawn stretched across Mecca, illuminating rooftops and alleys, signaling the beginning of a new stage of the pilgrimage. After the restorative stillness of the night, the pilgrims gathered once more, garments adjusted, hearts steady, and intentions renewed. The road to Mina beckoned, a path both physical and spiritual, carrying them from the sanctity of the city toward the open expanse of the valley. With measured steps, the narrator joined the throng, a river of devotion moving in unison, each pilgrim both individual and part of a vast collective journey. The streets leading out of Mecca had an almost ritual cadence. The murmur of prayer blended with the soft shuffle of sandals and the occasional call of guidance from experienced pilgrims. Each footfall carried both fatigue and anticipation. fatigue from the previous day's sacred exertions, anticipation for the new horizon that stretched ahead. Camels and carts moved quietly along the edges, yet the central flow of human motion dominated, a living current of purpose. The narrator felt both the intimacy of personal reflection and the expansive awareness of joining thousands in simultaneous devotion. As the pilgrims approached the valley, Mina unfolded before them like a vast white sea. Thousands of tents, uniformly arranged yet softly swaying in the morning breeze, created a striking visual rhythm. Their stark whiteness, scattered across the undulating desert floor, reflected the sun with a muted glow, evoking both calm and awe. The narrator paused briefly, taking in the scene. A temporary city born of devotion, each tent sheltering pilgrims with their own prayers, hopes, and quiet anticipation. The valley itself seemed to breathe, carrying the weight of collective intent across stone, sand, and air. The journey to Mina was not merely about arrival, but about presence and motion. Each step, measured and mindful, was a meditation, a conscious movement through sacred geography. Conversation was subdued. Gestures were minimal yet meaningful. Fellow pilgrims adjusted burdens for one another, offered water, or simply shared a glance of understanding. There was no rush to reach the tents, for the path itself carried spiritual significance. The exertion, the discipline, and the awareness of being part of a continuum of faith stretching across centuries. The valley floor varied in texture, patches of coarse sand, occasional stones, and the faintest hint of desert flora resilient in the arid soil. Each footfall pressed against the history of countless pilgrims before, a tactile reminder of devotion and endurance. The narrator observed children moving with surprising energy, elders walking with deliberate care, and young pilgrims whose steps carried both awe and eagerness. All of them shared a unified rhythm, a steady pulse of intention, prayer, and focus. Arrival at the tented city brought a gentle relief. Pilgrims adjusted bedding, shared modest meals, and gathered briefly to rest while still aware of the spiritual momentum required. Every movement carried dual purpose, tending to the body while preparing the mind for the coming stages of pilgrimage. Here, within the ordered expanses of Mina, anticipation for the day of Arafah began to settle into hearts, a quiet focus tempered by reflection on the journey thus far. The tents themselves seemed to embody both simplicity and transcendence. They were shelters for the body, yet the space within became a meditation on devotion, humility, and shared humanity. Even the soft sounds of distant conversation, the rustle of fabric in the wind, and the occasional call of prayer from a neighboring tent contributed to the rhythm of the valley. The narrator absorbed it all, feeling a balance between exertion and rest, anticipation and contemplation, self and collective presence. As the sun climbed higher, shadows softened across the valley floor, and the flow of pilgrims settled into routines of preparation, reflection, and prayer. The road to Mina had ended, yet the spiritual journey continued, poised for the next pivotal stage, the day of Arafah. Each step, each breath, each heartbeat had brought them closer, ready to participate fully in the sacred moment that awaited beyond the valley. The first light of dawn spread over the valley of Mina, casting a muted glow on the array of tents and the distant hills. Pilgrims stirred quietly, adjusting their garments and securing belongings, but the air was already heavy with anticipation. Today was the day of Arafah, the pinnacle of the pilgrimage, the moment when the vast desert became both altar and mirror for countless souls. The narrator moved with the crowd, not in haste, but in reverent awareness, every step carrying the weight of intention and the quiet excitement of spiritual proximity. The road from Mina to the plain of Arafah stretched endlessly, yet each stride felt purposeful, each inhalation measured and sacred. Dust rose gently beneath feet, caught in the soft morning wind, mingling with the muted sounds of prayer and whispered reflection. The narrator observed fellow pilgrims, faces radiant with devotion, eyes lowered in contemplation, hands lifted in silent supplication. There was no need for words here. Presence alone carried meaning, and every heartbeat seemed to echo the shared yearning for forgiveness and closeness to the divine. Arriving at Arafah, the vastness of the plain unfolded like a canvas painted with human longing. The horizon stretched endlessly, barren yet alive with the steps, gestures, and prayers of thousands. Pilgrims found spaces among the rolling dust and stone, forming clusters yet never truly separating, a living mosaic of devotion. The narrator stood still for a moment, taking in the immense scale, the rhythm of collective breath, and the unspoken dialogue between human humility and divine presence. The wind swept across the plain, warm and dry, carrying whispers of prayer and dust that kissed the skin. Every sensation became magnified, the scrape of sand beneath the feet, the soft murmur of collective supplication, the distant calls to prayer. The narrator felt the body aligned with the moment, every muscle relaxing into a natural attentiveness, every thought turning inward. Here, on this plateau, the ordinary boundaries of self seemed to dissolve, leaving only presence, intention, and the quiet pulse of universal yearning. Pilgrims lifted their hands in quiet supplication, their murmurs blending into a single resonance that seemed to rise with the heat of the day. The narrator joined, voicing silent prayers, reflecting on past actions, seeking forgiveness, and surrendering intentions for the future. Each inhale carried humility, each exhale, release. Time became malleable. Hours stretched and compressed, measured less by the sun than by the depth of reflection, the sincerity of petitions, and the attentive stillness of hearts open to grace. The sun climbed steadily, casting long shadows across the plain and warming the dust underfoot. Pilgrims shifted gently, adjusting positions, yet the sense of reverent focus remained unbroken. The narrator observed subtle acts of devotion, a shoulder pressed against the stone to kneel, a hand brushing sand in quiet grounding, eyes lifting briefly toward the horizon in wordless acknowledgement of the divine. Each act, though small, carried immense weight in the shared consciousness of the gathering. As afternoon advanced, the intensity of the moment deepened. The wind stirred in gusts across the plain, lifting dust into ephemeral swirls that seemed to join the prayers themselves, carrying intention across space and time. The narrator felt a profound stillness beneath the motion of bodies and the movement of air. The immensity of forgiveness, mercy, and divine attention settling into a palpable presence. It was a quiet awe that demanded no expression, only acceptance, and profound contemplation. The sun began its descent, gilding the plain in amber and long shadows. Pilgrims rose slowly, collecting themselves with care, aware that the next stage awaited, the journey toward Muzdalifah. The plain of Arafah had fulfilled its sacred purpose, leaving hearts lightened, minds focused, and spirits aligned with humility and devotion. The narrator, alongside the caravan, moved toward the horizon, feeling the momentum of ritual and reflection carrying each step forward. As the shadows lengthened and the first stars began to glimmer, the pilgrims set their faces toward Muzdalifah. The day at Arafah had ended, yet its imprint remained, deep and indelible, guiding the faithful into the night journey, the next sacred phase, and the continued rhythm of pilgrimage. As the pilgrims departed the expansive plain of Arafah, the sun dipped behind distant hills, leaving a warm amber glow, fading into twilight. The narrator moved with the caravan toward Muzdalifah, the desert stretching in quiet expanse under the evening sky. Every step carried the residual reverence of the day, the stillness of hearts shaped by hours of reflection, humility, and supplication. The shift from the intense devotion of Arafah to the anticipation of Muzdalifah was subtle, yet profound. The journey continued, but now with a softer, contemplative rhythm. Muzdalifah welcomed the pilgrims with an open horizon. The plain was sparsely dotted with scattered fires, their flickering light reflecting off the stones and dust. The air was cooler here, carrying a faint trace of desert flora and the soft remnants of the day's wind. Pilgrims moved slowly, searching for suitable spots to rest, spread mats, or kneel in quiet prayer. The narrator noticed the hushed conversations, brief exchanges of encouragement, and the gentle gestures of care. Shared water, folded blankets, or a guiding hand, reminding everyone of the communal essence of this sacred night. The open sky above was a canopy of stars, scattered in brilliant clarity across the inky expanse. The narrator tilted the head upward, taking in the celestial panorama. Constellations mirrored on earth in the alignment of the tents, in the orderly clusters of pilgrims, and in the rhythmic motions of small fires dotting the valley. The sky seemed to draw the gaze inward, inspiring reflection and awe, a gentle reminder of the infinite beyond the human struggle, and the guidance that had accompanied every step since the journey began. Gathering pebbles for the coming ritual became an act of quiet mindfulness. The narrator knelt, sifting through sand and stone, selecting each smooth, rounded pebble with careful attention. This simple task, so practical in purpose, took on symbolic weight. Each pebble represented intention, faith, and the conscientious acknowledgement of the challenges, missteps, and acts of devotion that had led to this night. Pilgrims around the narrator performed the same task, their motions synchronized in a silent rhythm, yet each action retained a personal meditation, a whispered covenant with what was to come. Meals were simple, eaten quietly beneath the canopy of stars. Bread, dates, and water nourished the body, while the mind lingered in the residue of the day's reflection. Conversations were sparse, gentle, and meaningful. Recollections of steps taken, observations of the Kaaba, or musings on prayers offered and received. Every sound was measured, contributing to the calm rather than disturbing it. creating a shared stillness that made the night feel almost sacred in itself. Prayer continued intermittently, each pilgrim finding moments to kneel or sit in private communion, the faint echoes of their devotion carried across the quiet plain. The narrator experienced a profound alignment of body, mind, and intention. The rhythm of breathing mirrored the subtle pulse of the desert, the whisper of winds over sand, and the distant flicker of fires. The night became a living meditation, each detail a thread in the larger tapestry of ritual, history, and communal devotion. As darkness deepened, shadows lengthened, and the cold of night pressed gently against the skin, a quiet vigilance persisted. Pilgrims lay down in small clusters or sat in silent contemplation, aware that the coming day demanded both physical readiness and spiritual alignment. The narrator felt the stillness seep into the bones, a grounding force that tempered exhaustion with quiet energy, preparing both body and heart for what was to follow. The night at Muzdalifah unfolded in gentle expanses of silence, light, and reflection. Stars mirrored the scattered fires below, each point of brightness resonating with individual intention and collective purpose. Pebbles were gathered, prayers whispered, and rest taken, all in preparation for the ritual of the next day. In this serene interval, the narrator absorbed the lessons of endurance, presence, and mindfulness, readying for the continuation of pilgrimage, both symbolic and literal, that awaited with the coming dawn. The stars faded slowly as the horizon hinted at the first light of dawn. The pilgrims of Muzdalifah rose from their scattered mats, carrying the stillness of the night within them, their minds attuned to the next sacred act. The narrator held the pebbles gathered the previous evening, turning them over in the palm, feeling the texture, the weight, and the smoothness of each one. What had begun as a practical task now revealed its deeper resonance, each stone a small vessel for intention, a tangible representation of devotion, accountability, and reflection. The act of holding the stones became meditation. Fingers brushed the edges, thumbs pressed into rounded surfaces, and each movement evoked thoughtfulness. The narrator considered the stones as metaphors, obstacles once external, now internalized, sins and doubts transformed into objects that could be acknowledged, confronted, and released. There was a quiet power in this physical gesture, a moment in which the material and spiritual merged. The palm cradled not only stone, but intention, and in that union, awareness deepened. Around the narrator, pilgrims performed the same motion with quiet concentration. Some murmured prayers with each selection, others breathed slowly, letting reflection shape their focus. The stones were small, unremarkable in isolation, yet in their cumulative presence, they became instruments of purification. Each pebble symbolized humility, effort, and resolve, a reminder that spiritual journeys often demanded both symbolic and literal action, patience and repetition. The desert plain, bathed in the soft glow of early light, framed this ritual with serenity. Pebbles lay arranged in small clusters, reflecting both the diversity and unity of intention among pilgrims. The narrator felt a subtle energy from the congregation, a resonance of shared purpose that transcended language, culture, or circumstance. Each act of holding and selecting stones was a silent vow, a personal meditation, a commitment to release burdens and approach the divine with clarity and sincerity. In reflection, the stones became mirrors of inner life. The roughness of some reminded the pilgrim of stubborn doubts, the smoothness of others, of moments of grace and ease. Each pebble was both obstacle and opportunity, a tiny symbol of transformation held briefly in the hand before being cast outward. The narrator felt the power of this metaphor deepen. Intention concentrated in the palm, awareness sharpened by tactile interaction, and release achieved through deliberate action. The body, mind, and spirit aligned in preparation for the ritual of the Jamarat. Sunrise began to illuminate the valley, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The soft glow highlighted the contours of the stones, the folds of garments, and the faces of pilgrims, each carrying both anticipation and reflection. The narrator noticed how the rising sun transformed the landscape. What had been shadowed and quiet became vivid and purposeful, a natural reminder of renewal and the cyclical rhythm of devotion. The day demanded readiness, yet the moments before action offered pause, reflection, and grounding. The symbolic weight of the stones lingered as the pilgrims prepared to move toward the Jamarat. Each pebble, each gesture, and each prayer coalesced into intention ready to be enacted. The narrator felt a heightened awareness of the coming ritual. The physical casting of stones was not merely repetition, but the external expression of internal clarity, the tangible release of obstacles, and the affirmation of faith. The horizon carried both the light of dawn and the promise of spiritual encounter, bridging preparation with action. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the desert and the pilgrims, the moment of transition approached. The stones rested firmly in hands, hearts centered and minds steady. The journey from collection to casting, from reflection to action, embodied the rhythm of devotion, deliberate, symbolic, and transformative. With one final breath of anticipation, the narrator joined the crowd moving toward the Jamarat, carrying the weight and clarity of intention into the next stage of pilgrimage. The heat of the rising sun pressed softly on the valley as pilgrims converged toward the Jamarat. The stones of intention rested firmly in palms, a quiet weight of reflection and resolve. Dust rose under the shuffle of countless feet, mingling with the low hum of prayer and anticipation. The narrator moved with the crowd, careful yet unhurried, sensing the collective focus that filled the air. Here, in this early form of the ritual area, each gesture carried centuries of meaning, each motion a symbolic rejection of evil and weakness. The ritual structures were simple, weathered, and functional, reflecting their 7th century origins. Pilgrims approached the pillars in disciplined succession, mindful of spacing, rhythm, and respect. The narrator observed the pattern of movement, feet in measured steps, hands raised with stones poised, eyes fixed not merely on the target, but on the intention behind each cast. The physical simplicity of the pillars belied the profound internal work they demanded, confronting failings, reaffirming commitment, and releasing burdens symbolically into the desert air. Crowds shifted, as each person enacted the ritual, a flowing choreography of devotion. There was no haste, only a collective rhythm: step, pause, throw, return. Even in the earliest structures, designed for practicality rather than grandeur, the human effort formed a subtle cadence, echoing across the plain. The narrator felt both a part of this continuity and uniquely aware of the personal significance of each pebble cast. Dust swirled lightly in eddies around ankles and skirts, a tactile reminder that each act of rejection and release was grounded, physical, and immediate. The first stone left the hand with quiet resolve. Its flight traced an arc of intent, landing against the pillar with a soft impact that resonated far more than its sound. Each successive throw followed, deliberate and purposeful. The narrator observed fellow pilgrims, hands trembling slightly with emotion, lips moving in silent prayer, eyes lifted to the horizon in a gesture of surrender and affirmation. The stones carried not only intention, but a release of doubt, fear, and past missteps. Each pebble was a small victory, a tangible act of internal transformation enacted through physical motion. The ritual's discipline encouraged mindfulness. Crowds moved with mutual awareness, careful not to obstruct, careful to maintain harmony. The narrator noticed subtle interactions: a pilgrim adjusting the flow for a neighbor, a whispered encouragement, a gentle pause for someone faltering. Even amid thousands, the ceremony maintained intimacy and respect. It was both a personal reckoning and a shared meditation, a moment where human determination and spiritual aspiration converged in tangible form. Time and motion became inseparable. Step by step, throw by throw, the narrator felt the symbolic weight of the ritual lift incrementally. The desert air carried not just dust, but an intangible resonance. Prayers mingled with intention, effort with release, and devotion with humility. Each rotation around the pillars, each arc of the arm, each pebble landing softly, reinforced the continuity of human striving across centuries. Completion arrived gradually, almost imperceptibly. The final stones were cast with quiet satisfaction, hands relaxing, eyes lingering on the pillars that had held the symbolic burden of evil for generations. The narrator felt a grounding calm settle in. The ritual enacted, the obstacles acknowledged and symbolically expelled. It was a moment of relief, humility, and reaffirmed devotion, a pause before the next stage of the pilgrimage. Returning to Mina, the pilgrims moved in measured procession. The sun continued its climb, illuminating the valley of tents, the murmurs of conversation, and the quiet acknowledgement of shared accomplishment. The journey back was contemplative, yet infused with a subtle lightness. The symbolic weight of the stones released, the energy of devotion flowing into collective celebration. The narrator felt both the satisfaction of completion and the anticipation of continued participation in the pilgrimage's unfolding rhythm. The road ahead shimmered with communal purpose and quiet joy, bridging the profound spiritual work of the stoning with the celebratory moments awaiting in Mina. Each step echoed the lessons of intention, discipline, and humility, guiding pilgrims toward reflection, rest, and the next acts of devotion in the sacred journey. Returning to Mina from the ritual of the Jamarat, the pilgrims carried a subtle lightness in their steps, a quiet celebration threaded through the rhythm of movement. The sun hung high over the valley, casting warmth across tents and the desert plain, illuminating the aftermath of devotion with gentle clarity. Today was Eid al-Adha, the festival of sacrifice, and even in its early form within 7th century Islam, it radiated with communal purpose, joy, and spiritual fulfillment. The narrator observed the unfolding preparations with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. Families gathered around simple fires, arranging meals, slicing meat from freshly sacrificed animals, and distributing portions to neighbors, travelers, and those in need. The act of sacrifice was not solely about ritual compliance. It embodied generosity, humility, and the tangible care of a community bound by faith. Each shared portion carried both nourishment and intention, a reinforcement of human interconnectedness rooted in devotion. Children moved among the tents with playful energy, their laughter bright and unrestrained against the backdrop of spiritual observance. Pilgrims of all ages engaged in gentle conversation, exchanging greetings of joy, offering assistance, or quietly reflecting on the rituals they had completed. The narrator noted the rhythm of communal life: chopping, cooking, sharing, serving, all unfolding in harmony with the spiritual pulse of the day. Even the simplest gestures, a shared loaf of bread, a hand extended to lift a kettle, resonated with profound meaning. Chants and prayers echoed softly across the tents, blending seamlessly with laughter and the occasional hum of song. The narrator felt the vibrancy of the moment, a living interplay of sacred and celebratory energy. Hands raised in prayer alternated with gestures of mirth, whispers of reflection, balanced with loud exclamations of joy. The festival embodied both devotion and delight, a duality that honored the intensity of the pilgrimage while celebrating the blessings of community, sustenance, and shared accomplishment. The scent of cooking fires mingled with desert air, carrying aromas of roasted meat, baking bread, and aromatic herbs. Pilgrims moved with attentiveness, both to nourishment and to ritual propriety, ensuring that the day's energy remained tempered with reflection. The narrator paused to observe these small moments of care: a woman smoothing a child's hair before offering him food, a man ensuring the elderly received their share first, a youth laughing quietly as he carried a tray of dates across the courtyard. Each detail illustrated how faith and celebration intertwined seamlessly, enriching the communal experience. The landscape itself seemed to reflect the festival's rhythm. Sunlight glinted across tent flaps, the gentle sway of cloth echoing the movement of people below. Dust rose softly with footsteps, settling gradually in the warmth of the day. Even the hills surrounding Mina appeared to embrace the festivities, their slopes offering a muted backdrop to human devotion and delight. The narrator sensed a harmony between physical environment and spiritual expression, a convergence of desert simplicity and celebratory abundance. As the day progressed, the intensity of activity softened. Shared meals concluded, conversations dwindled into gentle exchanges, and the vibrant energy of celebration gradually yielded to reflective stillness. Pilgrims rested beneath tents or reclined on mats, absorbing the satisfaction of ritual completion while contemplating the days to come. The narrator felt a subtle settling within, the joy of communal achievement mingled with an inner calm, preparing the heart for the continuation of the pilgrimage. By evening, Mina settled into quietude. The laughter, chatter, and bustling activity of Eid had diminished, leaving only the soft murmur of prayers and the gentle rustle of tents in the cooling desert air. The narrator reflected on the day, the generosity, the shared meals, the laughter, and the prayers, all woven into a living tapestry of devotion and community. The festival had celebrated both the physical and spiritual labor of pilgrimage, creating a bridge from the rituals of sacrifice to the preparation for the final stages ahead. The day of Eid closed gently, leaving hearts nourished and spirits aligned. With the desert night approaching, pilgrims gathered themselves for rest and reflection, poised to continue the sacred journey into the final acts of devotion. The rhythm of celebration gradually yielded to the anticipation of conclusion, setting the stage for the next chapter of pilgrimage. The desert of Mina stretched before the pilgrims like a familiar companion, bathed in the soft morning light after the quietude of Eid. Returning to its expanse brought a slower rhythm, a reflective tempo that contrasted with the vibrant energy of the festival. The tents, still arranged in orderly lines across the valley floor, seemed to breathe gently with the movements of those dwelling within them. The narrator moved among the pilgrims with awareness, each step measured and attentive, carrying both physical presence and spiritual reflection. The days in Mina were simpler now, governed by repetition, contemplation, and fellowship. Pilgrims assisted one another with small gestures, offering water, securing blankets, sharing dates, or adjusting each other's clothing after the exertions of travel. Conversations were quiet, filled with shared reflections on the rituals already completed, and soft laughter punctuated the communal harmony. The narrator felt the subtle shift in pace, a gentle settling into the cadence of devotion that allowed both mind and body to restore balance. Returning to the Jamarat, the narrator observed the ritual area in its early 7th century simplicity. The pillars, worn smooth by countless repetitions of faith, stood as reminders of both human endeavor and divine guidance. The act of casting pebbles, previously undertaken at the first pillar, was repeated now with reflection and precision. Each stone thrown carried intention, humility, and awareness, reaffirming the pilgrim's commitment and completing the symbolic rejection of evil. There was no hurry, each gesture was deliberate, a meditation in motion, a bridge between internal resolve and external action. Pilgrims moved with care around the Jamarat, conscious of one another, their movements synchronized by both ritual structure and mutual respect. Children mimicked the motions with quiet concentration. Elders guided the younger pilgrims, and families moved as clusters of shared purpose. The narrator sensed the collective rhythm as both grounding and elevating. The ritual reinforced community while allowing individual reflection to deepen. Each stone, each step, each breath became both literal and symbolic, a continuation of devotion that had been cultivated over the previous days. Between rituals, the narrator found moments of stillness. The desert wind whispered softly, carrying sand across the valley in gentle eddies. Shadows of the pillars shifted with the sun, creating a dynamic interplay of light and space that mirrored the inner movement of reflection and release. The narrator paused, taking in the texture of the sand underfoot, the subtle scent of the desert air, and the quiet murmur of distant prayer. Each sensory detail-grounded presence, emphasizing the union of physical journey and spiritual contemplation. Simple meals sustained the body: bread, dates, and water, shared among small clusters of pilgrims. These moments reinforced connection, humility, and gratitude, allowing time for conversation that was as reflective as it was practical. The narrator observed how food, like ritual, could become both sustenance and meditation, a shared act that carried spiritual significance in its simplicity. As the days in Mina progressed, the narrator noticed the subtle transformation in the pilgrims. Movements became steadier, intentions clearer, and hearts lighter. The repetition of ritual, the quiet fellowship, and the deliberate pacing cultivated a sense of completion even before the final journey back to Mecca. Pilgrims lingered in conversation, in prayer, and in simple observation, allowing both body and spirit to integrate the lessons and experiences of the pilgrimage. By evening, the valley held a calm of reflective anticipation. Shadows lengthened across the sand, fires flickered softly among tents, and the desert seemed to exhale with collective serenity. The narrator felt the profound satisfaction of closing the loop. The rituals at Mina, the communal harmony, and the slow, deliberate reflection had reinforced the journey's purpose. The pilgrims rested, prepared, and readied themselves, conscious that the next stage, the return to Mecca, would carry both culmination and quiet reverence. The valley of Mina, now suffused with evening light, seemed to promise both closure and continuity. Each step taken, each pebble cast, each shared meal, and each whispered prayer had woven the fabric of devotion and reflection, preparing pilgrims for the final return to the sacred city, where the heart of the journey awaited once more. The desert air of Mina gave way to the bustling streets of Mecca once again, but this time the atmosphere carried a different weight. The pilgrim returned not with anticipation, but with reflection. The Kaaba awaited, unchanging and eternal in its presence, yet the footsteps approaching it now were slower, more deliberate. Every movement felt heavy with gratitude. Every gaze cast toward the sacred structure deepened by the awareness that this journey was approaching its close. Entering the courtyard, the narrator felt a quiet hush settle over the familiar surroundings. The Kaaba, modest yet commanding, stood at the center, a magnet for devotion and memory. The stone walls, the surrounding arcades, the steady rhythm of fellow pilgrims, all were familiar, yet imbued with a poignancy unique to this farewell. Steps slowed instinctively, breath deepened, and each motion became an act of reverent acknowledgement. This tawaf was not merely ritual, it was a meditation on completion, a tangible expression of gratitude, humility, and closure. The movement began, a steady circle around the Kaaba. Unlike earlier rotations, there was no urgency or subtle competitive rhythm. Each step was savored, each rotation observed with attention. Pilgrims moved in quiet harmony, yet internally, each carried a unique reflection of their journey: the physical exertion, the spiritual growth, the moments of awe, the humility in prayer. The narrator sensed that every turn, every footfall, and every breath held resonance, connecting the individual with both the continuum of pilgrims past and the divine presence that had guided each stage. Around the Kaaba, the subtle interplay of light and shadow deepened awareness. Sunlight reflected gently off stone surfaces, casting elongated silhouettes across the courtyard. The murmur of prayers blended with the shuffle of sandals on stone, forming a quiet symphony of devotion. The narrator noticed these details with heightened sensitivity: the texture of worn stones beneath feet, the scent of incense and warm desert air, the soft rustle of garments, the fleeting glances exchanged between pilgrims acknowledging shared purpose. Each perception enriched the sense of sacred closure. With each rotation, the narrator observed subtle emotions in others: tears glinting in the morning light, hands lifted in silent supplication, lips moving softly with whispered prayer. There was joy here, yet it was tempered by the awareness of parting, a recognition that this chapter of the pilgrimage was nearing its conclusion. The collective energy of devotion was palpable, yet intimately personal, a balance of shared experience and inner reflection. The narrative of the journey, the tawaf, the sa'i, the rituals at Mina, the prayers at Arafah, culminated in this slow, deliberate motion. Each step around the Kaaba seemed to carry the weight of all prior experiences, the lessons absorbed, the humility cultivated, and the gratitude expressed. There was a gentle, almost tactile sense of closure with every rotation, as if the courtyard itself acknowledged the pilgrim's presence and participation. As the final circuits drew near, the narrator felt a contraction of both body and spirit. The circle, closing physically around the Kaaba, mirrored the journey's completion within. Steps became measured, breath deepened, and the heart carried a quiet reverence. Each gesture, though small, was imbued with meaning: a silent bow, a whispered prayer, a glance toward the horizon where the journey would continue beyond the sacred walls. Completing the last rotation, the narrator paused, standing before the Kaaba with hands folded and head bowed. There was a profound stillness, a moment suspended between departure and memory. Gratitude filled every cell. Reverence suffused every thought. The farewell tawaf had been enacted, and with it came both closure and readiness to move outward, to continue life's path beyond the pilgrimage, carrying its lessons, humility, and devotion. With careful, reverent steps, the narrator began to move away from the Kaaba, leaving behind not only the physical structure, but also the intense immediacy of the sacred experience. The courtyard faded gently into surrounding streets, and the journey outward commenced, setting the stage for reflection, rest, and the final passages of the pilgrimage. The streets of Mecca were quieter now, the intensity of pilgrimage softened by the completion of rituals and the passage of days. The narrator walked slowly, each step measured, carrying the weight of experience, devotion, and farewell. The Kaaba receded in the distance, its presence lingering in memory and heart, yet the movement outward was inevitable. Every footfall echoed with mixed emotions: sorrow at parting, relief at completion, fulfillment at having participated fully in centuries of devotion. Fellow pilgrims surrounded the narrator, each engaged in their own reflection, yet linked by shared experience. Some wept silently, tears tracing paths of gratitude and release. Others hummed quiet chants, their voices mingling with the whisper of desert wind through the streets. Children clung to parents, wide-eyed and aware of the solemnity of departure. while elders walked with slow, deliberate steps, savoring the last glimpses of the city. Each gesture, glance, and sound resonated with communal intimacy, a tapestry woven from thousands of individual journeys converging and diverging once more. The streets themselves seemed transformed by the pilgrimage. Cobblestones and sand, once traversed in urgency and motion, now bore the weight of reflection. Shops were open, yet their bustle felt subdued, the rhythm of commerce harmonizing with the inner cadence of departing pilgrims. Lanterns swayed softly in the morning breeze, casting long, gentle shadows over the alleys and courtyards. The narrator inhaled the air deeply, tasting the lingering scent of incense, dust, and desert warmth, allowing each element to anchor presence and memory. As the caravan moved toward the city's edges, the emotional tide of departure intensified. Pilgrims exchanged farewells with gentle embraces, brief words of blessing, or silent acknowledgments. Some carried keepsakes, mementos of shared experience, while others held only memory and intention. The narrator felt an acute awareness of the journey's temporality. Every moment of connection, every shared glance, and every whispered prayer now balanced against the imminence of separation. The communal heart of Mecca, so alive in devotion, was beginning to disperse, scattering fragments of experience across distant homes and futures. The landscape beyond the city shifted gradually from the dense streets to open plains. Dust rose softly under the feet of pilgrims, and the desert horizon offered a visual metaphor for the journey's transition. The familiar giving way to the unknown, the sacred urban center yielding to open space. The narrator observed fellow travelers moving in clusters or alone, each person negotiating the rhythm of departure. Some softly singing prayers, others letting tears fall freely. The emotions were neither uniform nor controlled, yet collectively they formed a quiet symphony of closure, gratitude, and reflection. Memories of rituals, the tawaf, sa'i, stoning, prayer, and communal feasts, flowed in consciousness like a gentle current. The narrator recalled the initial anticipation at Mecca's outskirts, the awe of first sighting the Kaaba, and the meditative rhythm of each sacred step. Every act had left an imprint, a tangible echo in body and spirit, now carried outward into the surrounding landscape. This inward and outward movement, simultaneously reflective and physical, defined the act of leaving. It was departure in space, yet continuity in awareness. The journey toward the city's edges allowed time for final prayers and silent acknowledgement of the sacred presence now being left behind. Each step became both literal and symbolic, a gesture of farewell and of ongoing commitment. The narrator noticed the subtle interactions among pilgrims, a hand briefly placed on a shoulder, a shared nod of understanding, a whispered word of encouragement, each moment reinforcing the communal bond even as separation loomed. As the outskirts of Mecca drew nearer, the city appeared smaller in the distance, yet no less potent in memory. The narrator felt a mixture of relief, having completed the sacred obligations, and sorrow, leaving a place of profound spiritual intensity. Every breath, every step, carried the weight of closure, the resonance of devotion, and the anticipation of journeying home. The pilgrimage's outward motion now extended beyond the sacred city, carrying its lessons, humility, and gratitude into the next chapter of life. The caravan continued across the plains, moving from the familiar streets into the open desert. each pilgrim attuned to their own reflection, yet linked invisibly by the shared experience of Mecca. Departure had begun, and with it, the road home awaited, the next stage in which memory, devotion, and life's ongoing rhythm would converge. The desert stretched endlessly as the caravan moved steadily away from Mecca, the city shrinking into memory behind a curtain of dust and sunlight. Each step carried both the physical rhythm of travel and the weight of reflection. The narrator walked among fellow pilgrims, their faces marked by fatigue, devotion, and quiet contemplation. The outward journey mirrored the inward transformation. Every mile traversed across sand and stone became a meditation on the days spent in sacred presence, on prayers whispered, rituals enacted, and intentions clarified. Conversation in the caravan was subdued yet profound. Travelers shared insights from the pilgrimage, discussing what they had learned, what had shifted within their hearts, and what they intended to carry back to their families and tribes. Words were measured, not hurried, each exchange carrying depth, sincerity, and a quiet resonance that reflected the collective experience. The narrator listened and spoke in turn, finding that the act of sharing amplified both understanding and memory, connecting individual reflection with communal insight. Children moved lightly among the adults, curiosity and fatigue mingling in their small steps. Elders offered quiet guidance, sharing stories of past journeys and interpretations of ritual, weaving a sense of continuity into the present moment. Young adults discussed lessons learned, resolved to embody humility, patience, and generosity in daily life. Even the smallest interactions, a hand adjusting a sandal strap, a gentle nod of encouragement, a shared sip of water, reinforced the unity of purpose that had characterized the pilgrimage and now flowed gently into the caravan's rhythm. The desert itself seemed attuned to reflection. Winds swept across dunes and plains, raising soft clouds of sand that danced in shafts of sunlight. The narrator paused occasionally, inhaling the dry, fragrant air, feeling its touch on skin and through garments. Each gust seemed to echo thoughts carried inward during the pilgrimage, a physical whisper of continuity between outer journey and inner contemplation. The caravan's slow movement became a rhythm, step by step, mile by mile, mirroring the gradual unfolding of understanding, humility, and gratitude. Pilgrims discussed the significance of rituals, the tawaf, sa'i, stoning, and communal prayers, and how each might inform their lives beyond the journey. They reflected on lessons of endurance, patience, empathy, and spiritual attentiveness, translating experience into intention for their return. The narrator found meaning not only in memory, but in dialogue, recognizing that the shared reflection of the caravan was a continuation of devotion, a living testament to the transformative power of collective pilgrimage. Meals were simple, shared quietly during pauses. Bread, water, and dates provided sustenance, yet their significance extended beyond nourishment. Each act of eating together became a ritual of continuity, a moment of communal grounding that reminded pilgrims of the bonds formed in travel, devotion, and reflection. The narrator observed how these small acts, though mundane, carried symbolic weight. Patience, sharing, and attention to one another became tangible expressions of lessons learned in Mecca and Medina. The sun climbed and descended in its daily arc, marking time across the caravan's journey. Shadows stretched long over sand, guiding movement and pace as pilgrims attuned themselves to the rhythm of nature, as well as the cadence of contemplation. Each evening brought rest, each morning renewal, and within this steady cycle, the narrator experienced the gradual integration of pilgrimage into the fabric of being. Thoughts, gestures, and intentions harmonizing with body and spirit. By nightfall, conversation softened further. Stars emerged above the desert expanse, their quiet brilliance mirrored in the reflective faces of travelers. The narrator felt a profound sense of cohesion. The outer journey mirrored inner transformation. Communal dialogue reinforced individual growth, and the road home became both literal and symbolic, a bridge between sacred experience and life beyond the desert. Step by step, mile by mile, the caravan moved forward, carrying memories, lessons, and intentions. The journey was no longer simply about distance, but about the integration of all that had been gained. Humility, gratitude, devotion, and shared humanity. Each pilgrim's heart carried both reflection and anticipation, poised for the continuation of life beyond the journey, yet forever touched by the sacred landscape of Mecca and Medina. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, undulating in quiet waves of sand that shimmered beneath the midday sun. The caravan moved steadily, each step pressing against soft grains, leaving fleeting imprints that the wind would soon erase. The narrator walked with measured awareness, feeling both the weight of travel and the subtle gravity of reflection. The outward journey from Mecca had become an inward meditation, and now, amid the plains of the desert, every hardship, every mile, carried metaphorical significance. Traveling through the dunes encouraged contemplation. Each rise and fall underfoot mirrored the undulating rhythm of experience. Devotion and fatigue, joy and humility, anticipation and reflection. The narrator noted how the desert, vast and unmoving, served as both teacher and mirror. The stones, dust, and wind all seemed to whisper reminders of lessons learned in Mecca and Medina, embedding the pilgrimage's wisdom in the tactile and visual textures of the journey. The caravan's pace allowed for conversation interwoven with quiet observation. Travelers spoke softly about what they intended to carry home. Patience cultivated through tawaf, humility learned in the shadow of the Kaaba, resolve forged in the stoning rituals at Mina. Elders offered guidance, contextualizing the pilgrimage's teachings for younger pilgrims, while children listened intently, absorbing both words and example. The narrator reflected on how these exchanges reinforced understanding, transforming abstract lessons into living wisdom that could survive beyond the desert. The physical hardships of travel, blistered feet, scorching sun, the occasional gust of wind carrying fine sand, became metaphors for life's trials. Each difficulty recalled the perseverance demanded during the pilgrimage, the measured rhythm of steps, the patience required to navigate crowded spaces, and the endurance of heat and dust in sacred purpose. The narrator felt gratitude for the body's resilience, for the shared effort of the caravan, and for the way physical challenge had intertwined with spiritual insight, deepening the impact of memory and reflection. Memories of rituals surfaced gently during pauses in travel. The Kaaba, the sa'i between Safa and Marwa, the stillness at Arafah, and the Jamarat, all unfolded in the mind like a sacred tapestry. Each recollection was accompanied by the feeling of intention, the stones in the hand, the breath aligned with devotion, the communal heartbeat of pilgrims echoing across time. The narrator sensed how these experiences had transformed perception, teaching that external acts of ritual were inseparable from inner work, shaping character and consciousness alike. The desert itself seemed to guide introspection. The wind carried the scent of dry sand and distant vegetation. The heat of the sun marked the hours. The vast, unbroken horizon encouraged both humility and awe. The narrator noted how physical awareness of the environment paralleled mental and spiritual awareness. Steps became deliberate, thoughts became intentional, and memory and sensation merged into a coherent, reflective presence. Each pilgrim, walking quietly in their own rhythm, contributed to a shared silence that was both contemplative and communal. Evenings brought respite, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the dunes. Campfires flickered along the caravan's path, casting warm, dancing light on tired faces. Pilgrims shared water, bread, and stories, reinforcing the bonds forged through shared effort and devotion. The narrator observed how conversation often drifted from practical concerns to philosophical reflection. What had been gained in Mecca, how intentions had been clarified, what inner obstacles had been cast away like pebbles into the desert. The night became a crucible for integrating lessons learned, translating memory into intention for life beyond the journey. As familiar lands approached on the horizon, a sense of closure mingled with anticipation. The narrator felt the profound satisfaction of the journey's end drawing near, yet also the lingering imprint of the sacred experiences carried across desert sands. Each footprint, each conversation, each shared hardship and reflection had left marks, not just on the desert, but on the heart, mind, and spirit. The lessons of devotion, humility, and perseverance would accompany pilgrims long after the dunes had passed behind them. The caravan continued steadily forward, carrying not just bodies returning home, but hearts and minds transformed, imbued with insight, memory, and purpose. The desert, once vast and intimidating, had become a companion and teacher, leaving in its wake lessons as enduring as the sands themselves, ready to guide the pilgrims into the familiar yet forever altered lands awaiting beyond the horizon. The desert horizon began to shift, subtle hints of greenery and structured rooftops emerging against the vast expanse of sand. After weeks of sacred journeying, the narrator caught the first faint outlines of the village on the horizon. The familiar shapes, clusters of homes, the curve of the river, and the distant minaret stirred a complex blend of anticipation, relief, and reverence. Each step forward was measured, the mind balancing memories of the pilgrimage with the excitement of returning to the familiar. The caravan's pace slowed naturally, as if sensing the nearing destination. Pilgrims adjusted their garments, rearranged bundles, and exchanged quiet words of encouragement. Children pressed close to elders, eyes wide, whispering their own excitement. Elders offered gentle guidance, observing how the return to home demanded both celebration and reflection. The narrator walked among them, heart attuned to the rhythmic crunch of sand beneath feet, ears catching murmurs of prayers and stories of the journey. As the village drew nearer, the human dimension of return became more vivid. Figures appeared along the outskirts, waiting with anticipation, mothers holding younger siblings, fathers scanning the road, and friends who had heard of the pilgrimage's progress arriving to witness its culmination. Faces carried a mixture of joy, anxiety, and curiosity, emotions mirrored by the returning pilgrims themselves. The narrator noticed the interplay of familiarity and reverence, the subtle dance between anticipation and reflection that marked the first sight of home after sacred departure. The first reunion unfolded with quiet intensity. Children ran forward, small hands reaching for elders who had traveled far, laughter mingling with tears. Adults exchanged embraces, some weeping softly, others speaking words of gratitude and relief. The narrator felt the power of this moment, recognizing it as a culmination not only of physical travel, but also of spiritual transformation. Every gesture, hand on shoulder, tear wiped, shared breath of laughter, held significance, a bridge between sacred journey and the intimacy of home. The village streets, familiar yet subtly transformed in memory, reflected both continuity and change. Familiar homes, dusty paths, and simple gardens carried a sense of permanence, grounding pilgrims after the vast expanses of desert and sacred spaces they had traversed. The narrator observed neighbors emerging to witness the caravan's approach, their faces animated with joy and curiosity, contributing to a chorus of communal celebration that blended seamlessly with the pilgrim's own inner reflection. Memories of the pilgrimage surfaced with clarity: the tawaf around the Kaaba, the quiet stillness of Arafah, the disciplined rhythm of stoning at Mina, and the communal meals of Eid. Each recollection mingled with the sights and sounds of home, forming a tapestry of continuity between sacred journey and everyday life. The narrator sensed how these experiences, once distant and monumental, now began to integrate with the rhythms of the familiar. Lessons internalized, intentions clarified, and humility carried gently into daily life. The caravan slowed to a stop at the village edge. Pilgrims gathered their belongings, adjusted garments, and shared final words with one another before stepping into the arms of waiting families. The narrator stood still for a moment, allowing the sensory richness of home, the smell of baked bread, the chatter of children, the distant call to prayer, to meld with the inner calm cultivated through pilgrimage. Gratitude, relief, and quiet joy swelled, mingling with the awareness that sacred work had been completed, yet its influence would persist. The first sight of home marked both conclusion and beginning. Pilgrims were physically returning, yet spiritually, they carried the essence of Mecca, Mina, and the desert within them. Each embrace, each laugh, each tear was a reminder that the journey's transformation extended beyond sacred spaces, embedding itself in daily life, relationships, and community. The narrator felt the profound continuity of devotion and human connection, poised to step fully into post-pilgrimage reflection. The village unfolded fully before the caravan now, alive with reunion, anticipation, and shared humanity. The horizon of home had been reached, yet the journey's lessons continued to resonate, ready to guide the pilgrims into the reflective and transformative days that followed. The village streets, now familiar once more, hummed with the quiet rhythm of daily life. Yet for the narrator, each corner, each path, and each sound carried subtle echoes of Mecca, Mina, and the desert plains traveled days ago. Returning home did not erase the pilgrimage. It layered it atop the ordinary, coloring routine with reverence, memory, and reflection. The steps along familiar dirt paths became reminders of steps taken around the Kaaba, between Safa and Marwa, and along the valleys of Mina. Neighbors greeted the returning pilgrim with curiosity and warmth. Questions came quickly, eager for details of the sacred journey, stories of distant places, rituals witnessed, and moments of awe that had etched themselves into memory. The narrator answered with patience, careful to convey both facts and the quieter subtleties of experience. The humility felt at Arafah, the rhythm of Tawaf, the silent gravity of the Jamarat. Even brief explanations became acts of sharing devotion, connecting the community with the spiritual currents that had carried the pilgrim for weeks. Children gathered near, wide-eyed, touching the folds of the narrator's Iram garments with awe. The simple fabric, once emblematic of preparation and sacred intention, now became a tangible bridge between distant rituals and their curiosity. Questions tumbled from eager voices. Did you see the Kaaba? Did you walk between the hills? Each inquiry was met with gentle recounting, and with each answer, the narrator felt the pilgrimage's lessons ripple outward, embedding themselves in younger minds and hearts. Daily routines resumed, yet they were quietly transformed. Meals taken now carried reflection. Prayers were spoken with heightened awareness, and chores were approached with deliberate patience and gratitude. The narrator observed moments that once would have seemed mundane: the sweeping of dust, the tending of animals, the fetching of water, as infused with significance. Each action became a small continuation of pilgrimage, an ongoing practice of humility, mindfulness, and intention. Conversations with family and elders deepened in intimacy. They asked about lessons learned, challenges faced, and insights gained. The narrator shared not only tales of events, but reflections on personal growth. Perseverance, cultivated in the desert heat, patience shaped by crowded rituals, and clarity born from quiet moments of prayer. These exchanges became reciprocal. Family members offered perspectives, interpretations, and encouragement, reinforcing the bridge between sacred experience and everyday life. Evenings were filled with reflection and storytelling. The narrator sat beneath the fading sun, recounting journeys across desert plains, the physicality of stoning the Jamarat, the collective hum of prayer at Mina, and the quiet awe of standing before the Kaaba. Each narrative was punctuated by the soft laughter of children, the nods of elders, and the gentle affirmation of neighbors who had walked similar paths in spirit. These moments underscored that the pilgrimage's lessons were not confined to distant lands. They were alive in the interactions, awareness, and devotion carried home. The narrator noticed how memory and presence intertwined. A glance at a rising sun mirrored the quiet majesty of Mecca's mornings. The rhythm of daily work recalled the cadence of desert travel. Even small sensations, sand beneath bare feet, The scent of warm bread, the call of evening prayer, carried layered significance, each a reminder of the internal journey sustained alongside the external one. Life had returned to routine, yet routine was now permeated by consciousness, gratitude, and continuity of purpose. Slowly, a balance emerged. The pilgrim navigated between ordinary life and ongoing reflection, integrating lessons of humility, devotion, patience, and generosity. Conversations, gestures, and memories formed a living tapestry, one that connected the sacred journey with the quotidian world. The narrator sensed that the pilgrimage had ended in distance, yet its influence persisted in every action, every thought, and every interaction. The days unfolded in gentle rhythm, bridging sacred experience and daily existence. Each shared story, each quiet reflection, each prayer, and each attentive gesture reinforced the enduring presence of pilgrimage in ordinary life. The narrator moved through the village with awareness, gratitude, and subtle joy, poised for the next stages of integration and reflection. The journey outward had ended, yet the inner journey continued, guiding steps, shaping heart, and illuminating ordinary moments with sacred intention. Evenings in the village carried a gentle hush, the sun dipping behind familiar rooftops while the air cooled and softened. The narrator sat among neighbors and friends, the quiet anticipation of gathering lending weight to the moment. Word of the pilgrimage had traveled ahead, and listeners leaned forward with eager attention, ready to receive stories imbued with both adventure and devotion. The recounting of sacred journeys had become a bridge between distant lands and familiar streets, between personal transformation and communal wisdom. The narrator spoke slowly, choosing words as deliberately as footsteps taken across desert sands. Tales of Mecca's bustling markets, the serene stillness at Arafah, and the rhythm of Tawaf unfolded like a tapestry. Listeners were captivated not by spectacle alone, but by the reverence and reflection woven into each moment. Children gasped at glimpses of the Kaaba, elders nodded knowingly at descriptions of rituals, and all were drawn into the cadence of memory, imagination, and devotion. Oral storytelling in this early Islamic context was itself sacred. These recounted journeys preserved not only facts, but the inner transformation, the emotions, and the lessons gained. Each listener absorbed not only what had been done, but why, how intention, humility, and perseverance shaped each act. The narrator realized that the act of sharing mirrored pilgrimage itself. The body and voice moved through space, words cast into attentive ears, intention carried across distance, creating connection and continuity. Neighbors asked questions eagerly. How did it feel to approach the Kaaba for the first time? What was most difficult at Mina? How did you find strength standing at Arafah, facing the vast plain? Each question prompted reflection, and the narrator responded not with mere narration, but with contemplation, offering insights on endurance, patience, and spiritual growth. Stories became lessons, anecdotes became mirrors, and memory became guidance for those who had yet to journey or who might follow in years to come. Children crowded closer, touching the folds of the narrator's worn ihram garments, curious about the textures, the simplicity, and the symbolism. Elders observed quietly, often prompting deeper questions, connecting the narrated experiences with broader reflections on faith, community, and devotion. Each listener became a participant in the journey, their imaginations walking alongside the narrator across sands and temples, through crowds and sacred rituals. The night deepened, bringing shadows and starlight across the village. Lanterns glimmered gently, and the soft murmur of conversation blended with the distant call to prayer. The narrator's voice, steady and measured, guided listeners through the rhythms of ritual and reflection. Walking between Safa and Marwa, casting stones at the Jamarat, offering prayers with intention and humility. Memory, narration, and reflection intertwined, creating a living record of Hajj that was both personal and communal. Stories were punctuated by moments of silence, allowing listeners to absorb the lessons and sensations described. The narrator emphasized the inner transformations, humility cultivated in crowded spaces, patience tempered by physical exertion, clarity and awe gained from standing in sacred presence. Words became vessels for experience, each tale a thread connecting the listener with generations of pilgrims who had walked similar paths. By the time the gathering drew to a close, the village lay quiet under the star-strewn sky. Listeners lingered in thought, recalling the narrated journey and reflecting on its meaning for their own lives. The narrator felt a quiet satisfaction, recognizing that sharing the pilgrimage extended its sacredness beyond personal experience. Each story became a seed of wisdom, a reminder that devotion, intention, and reflection could thrive in both faraway deserts and familiar streets. As the night deepened, the voices of listeners softened, replaced by the gentle rhythms of evening prayer, distant laughter, and the hush of sleeping homes. The narrator remained seated for a moment longer, letting the echoes of storytelling settle, aware that the pilgrimage lived on not just in memory, but in words, shared reflection, and the quiet inspiration it carried into the hearts of others. Years had passed since the narrator first set foot in Mecca, yet the pilgrimage remained vividly alive in memory. In quiet moments at home, the senses transported the mind back to desert plains, bustling markets, and the gentle sway of tents in Mina. The scent of warm sand, the sound of distant prayer, and the rhythm of footsteps around the Kaaba emerged unbidden, as though the past and present converged in a single, luminous thread. Memory, the narrator realized, had a way of reshaping both pain and beauty, of magnifying the lessons and softening the hardships. Sitting beneath a familiar tree, the narrator let the mind drift back to the first glimpse of Mecca on the horizon, the awe that had stirred in the chest, the anticipation tempered by humility. The streets, the crowds, the intense devotion, each moment replayed with clarity and subtle adjustment, as memory highlighted the grace in every gesture, the sacredness in every breath. Even the fatigue and dust-laden hardships of travel were softened in recollection, becoming markers of perseverance and resilience rather than burden. The stoning of the Jamarat returned vividly, the weight of stones in hand, the deliberate rhythm of throwing, and the hush of collective focus. Yet memory had gently emphasized intention over difficulty, devotion over discomfort. Each pebble cast was not merely an act of ritual, but a symbol etched into the mind of growth, humility, and spiritual refinement. The narrator felt a quiet warmth recalling how the desert wind mingled with prayers, carrying devotion across centuries and generations. Evenings in Mina and Mecca, once marked by fatigue and routine, now shimmered with reflective significance. The narrator remembered shared meals, laughter among fellow pilgrims, and moments of silent meditation beneath starlit skies. These sensory recollections were no longer merely experiences. They had become touchstones of wisdom, guiding present life with lessons once lived in the sacred journey. The tactile memory of sand beneath bare feet, the gentle sway of garments in wind, and the scent of incense and fire merged seamlessly with the lessons of patience, humility, and gratitude. The mind wandered further, recalling the return home and the integration of pilgrimage into daily life. Stories shared with neighbors, the curiosity of children, the gentle guidance offered to others, all felt newly precious in reflection. Memory amplified not only beauty, but also responsibility. The lessons of devotion were not confined to sacred spaces, but now extended into ordinary life, subtly shaping every action and thought. The narrator observed how recollection itself became a kind of pilgrimage, internal and unending. Memory also carried softness for moments of struggle, exhaustion from travel, the difficulty of crowded rituals, the heat of the desert sun, all returned as gentle reminders rather than burdens. Each challenge now appeared as a catalyst for growth, each obstacle as a teacher. In recalling them, the narrator sensed a convergence of inner strength and grace, a recognition that hardship and beauty were intertwined, inseparable threads in the tapestry of experience. Time, too, had reshaped perspective. Faces of fellow pilgrims, long past, now glimmered with clarity and affection in memory. The narrator reflected on their shared devotion, the silent bonds formed across sand and prayer, and the echoes of guidance and companionship that endured long after the journey had ended. The desert, Mecca, Mina, and the Kaaba all remained vivid in recollection, yet their presence now resided not in distance but within the contours of memory, shaping thought, intention, and spirit. In this quiet contemplation, the narrator felt the resonance of the pilgrimage as a continuous force, neither confined to place nor to time. Memory had preserved its lessons, softened its trials, and amplified its beauty, leaving a subtle yet enduring guidance for life. The mind, revisiting sights, sounds, and sensations, found both peace and illumination. Pain had been tempered, devotion strengthened, and gratitude deepened. The pilgrimage, though completed decades ago, lived within every thought and gesture, every quiet breath and intentional act. Memory had become the final sanctuary of sacred experience, a space in which lessons endured, beauty thrived, and devotion persisted. The narrator sat in reflection, allowing the echo of past footsteps, prayers, and landscapes to settle softly, guiding toward the final chapter of contemplation and closure. The quiet of evening settled over the village, its familiar rhythms blending seamlessly with the stillness of memory. The narrator sat beneath a tree, watching the sun dip beyond the horizon, and felt the subtle, persistent echo of pilgrimage within the heart. Though years had passed and life had resumed its ordinary cadence, the journey remained, an inner landscape mapped in devotion, reflection, and intention. The pilgrim's path had extended beyond deserts and cities, reaching into the quiet chambers of thought and spirit. Everyday life flowed gently around this inner resonance. Simple routines, tending animals, drawing water, gathering firewood, were now tinged with awareness. Each breath, each gesture, carried the imprint of sacred experience. The narrator observed how devotion had woven itself into the fabric of daily existence, transforming ordinary moments into reminders of humility, patience, and gratitude. Life continued, yet within it flowed the quiet, enduring rhythm of pilgrimage. Memory remained a living guide. Thoughts returned often to Mecca, Mina, and Arafah, not as distant events, but as currents shaping perception and intention. The tactile recollections of sand beneath bare feet, the murmur of prayers, and the shared heartbeat of pilgrims were preserved with crystalline clarity. These moments, replayed in quiet reflection, had matured into lessons of endurance, generosity, and awareness, principles as tangible and sustaining as the water drawn from a village well. The narrator recognized the vast tapestry of pilgrimage beyond personal experience. Pilgrims of centuries past had walked similar sands, raised hands in devotion, and carried hearts tuned to the sacred. Likewise, countless journeys would follow, each echoing with unique devotion, yet joined by the continuity of intention and humility. In this awareness, the narrator felt a profound connection to humanity, a chain of hearts bound by reverence, persistence, and the universal longing to approach the divine with sincerity. Stories of the journey, once shared aloud in gatherings and under starlit skies, continued to live in memory and example. The lessons imparted to neighbors, children, and companions endured in daily actions and quiet reflections. The narrator observed how the act of sharing pilgrimage reinforced its presence, extending its influence far beyond the sands of Mecca and the tents of Mina. Devotion became both personal and communal, a ripple across generations of thought, prayer, and action. In this final reflection, the interplay of time, place, and spirit revealed its full depth. Life had moved forward, years had passed, seasons changed, and familiar paths were trodden countless times. Yet the pilgrimage remained, suspended in memory, intention, and heart. Each glance at the horizon, each inhalation of desert air, each recollection of shared devotion reaffirmed the constancy of spiritual pursuit. The journey was complete in space, yet eternal in its imprint on consciousness. The heart, having returned, bore both closure and continuity. Gratitude suffused every thought, for endurance, for guidance, for communion with fellow pilgrims, and for the grace of participation in a timeless ritual. Humility lingered as a quiet companion, reminding the narrator of both limitations and potential, of the fragile beauty inherent in human devotion. Reflection deepened serenity, blending memory, presence, and intention into a calm, abiding equilibrium. Even as the sun disappeared completely, the village settled into night, lanterns flickering softly, stars stretching across the heavens, and the gentle murmurs of evening prayer threading through quiet streets. The narrator exhaled slowly, acknowledging the enduring flow of pilgrims who had come before and those yet to come. Every heart journeyed in its own time, yet all were joined by the timeless rhythm of devotion, humility, and awe. The final breath was both release and embrace, a meditation upon life, faith, and continuity. The pilgrim's footsteps, now recalled in stillness, resonated within. A cadence of gratitude, a rhythm of humility, and the gentle pulse of unity with humanity across generations. Life moved forward, yet the pilgrimage remained, an eternal current beneath the surface of ordinary days. A heart that had returned, carrying within it the sacred flow of journey and devotion. Quietly, profoundly, forever.